Okay, you can continue, sorry.
No problem. Okay, hi, assalamu alaikum everyone. This is the first lecture that we have on the radiology crash course. Let's begin. So this is the name of the scientist that we have. This is brief history of radiology. So it's just important to know the name of the scientist, especially the last name, and the date when he discovered it and the date when he got the Nobel Prize. They may ask you about this. Just note the date and where it happened, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And let's begin. Okay, so how are X-rays produced? So basically you have an X-ray tube, which is basically your source, and then you have the subject, which is the person, and the image, which is formed behind. So what is the basis, or what is the rationale behind an X-ray? It's the way the images are produced is almost identical to how a shadow appears on a surface. So remember when you were children, you were playing the game where you made like animal shapes with your hands, and then the shadow was there at the back. It's the exact same concept. So there's light which is going to pass through, and it's going to be blocked by some structures, and the structures that it passes through will appear in a different color. Okay, so there's basically an X-ray tube, a subject, and an image. So how is an X-ray produced? Basically, we have something known as an X-ray tube, as we just talked about, which is the source. So first of all, we have a vacuum chamber. Okay. Also, I have added like these few slides, which I thought would make explaining this a lot easier. So these are basically slides from either previous batches or stuff like that that I just found useful and just added them here. Okay. It's nothing special to it. Okay. So basically, this is the image that is present in your slides, and this is the image that I added. So basically, what you have over here is known as an X-ray tube. And basically, there is a cathode over here and an anode over here. What is a cathode? A cathode is a negatively charged terminal, and an anode is a positively charged terminal. And then you have a heated filament. So a heated filament contains current, and current, as we know, is the flow of electrons. So once we heat this place over here, this will supply energy, or heat is energy, and this releases electrons from the cathode. Cathode is negatively charged and anode is positively charged. So the positive charge attracts these electrons, and then they strike this tungsten target. Now this target, basically the electrons strike this target, and then they emit photons, or let's call them, photons are basically particles of light. Okay, so basically light waves, and these light waves emitted are X-rays. Now, an important thing to remember over here is that there is a vacuum chamber over here. So there's no other particles, no other air particles over here. And the idea is that we don't want the particles released from the cathode to interfere with the particles, air particles, which may have been present if there was no vacuum, right? What else? Okay, so the target material, as it says over here, is made of tungsten, and the characteristics are that it's made of a high atomic number. It has a high melting temperature. Why does it have a high melting temperature? Because most of the energy that is produced is converted to heat. Okay, around 1% or very small percentage of energy is actually converted to the useful energy that we need of X-rays. And this is why we need the target material to be something that will not melt while we're doing the scans, right? Also, the target material, since this produces a lot of heat, the target material and the whole apparatus needs to be cooled by water. Okay, so that's another significance of this. And then the other thing is that this target material is cut at 45 degrees. So why do we cut at 45 degrees? Because the subject that we place is going to be over here, and then the image is going to be produced on a detector, which is going to be behind the person, right? So we aim it at 45 degrees to be able to change the direction of the emitted X-rays so that it does not just reflect backwards. Yeah, that's mostly the important points over here. And this is basically the general idea that you need for X-rays and CT scans. The rest of it is all just tiny bits of information that is supplementary to this. So is this concept clear, or would you like me to repeat something? So over here in this slide, we can see that there is water in, water out. This is the cooling method. This is the amount of energy or heat that's produced. This is the useful light. Okay, so what is an X-ray? An X-ray is basically part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and it is a form of electromagnetic wave. So I'm sure we all saw this image in physics when we were studying in high school. Basically, it's a spectrum that has high frequency and then it goes lower and lower and lower. And X-rays are somewhat towards the high energy, high frequency, and smaller wavelength spectrum. Okay, so anything that has high frequency will have high energy, and if the frequency is high, the wavelength will be low. Why is this important for us in medicine? Because the higher the energy of something, the more likely it is to be dangerous to the body, right? And also, since it has a lower or a higher frequency, so since the wavelength is small, it can pass through more particles as opposed to radio waves, for example. So that's why we can't reuse radio waves for the imaging purposes. And this is why we could use gamma rays. Technically, they would be able to pass through a lot more, but it's way too dangerous to use it, right? Okay. So moving on to KVP and MA. So KVP is basically the amount of voltage that you supply, okay? And the amount of voltage that will be supplied to the cathode is going to determine the energy of the electrons which are released. So if you apply a lot more voltage across the structure here, because you're applying a voltage across the negative and the positive ends, right? So if you increase the amount of voltage, it will increase the amount of energy of each individual electron. Now, how is this good? It may make the imaging clearer. It may make our images on the X-ray a lot, crisp or of a high resolution. But the downside is that there's going to be more harm to the body, right? So we always have to balance this out. So that's KVP. Now, what's MA? MA is basically stands for milliamperes, and it's basically the amount of current that you run through this system right here, right? So if we increase the amount of current, we will increase the number of electrons which are released, okay? So this can also help us increase the contrast of the image or make it more clearer, right? These are just two ways that we use. Yeah, that's about it. Okay, so over here, the next few slides are going to talk about how these X-rays are made. So there's two phenomena or two different types of mechanisms by which the X-rays are produced over here. What is KVP again? So KVP is the amount of voltage you apply over here. So you know how you have 10 volts, 15 volts. If we go to high school physics, it's the potential difference between these two, okay? And milliamperes is the current. So current is the number of electrons you're passing through a substance. KVP determines the energy of an electron. So let's say we have 3 electrons going through. If we increase the KVP, the energy of these will increase. So let's say it was 10 joules first. We increased this to we increased it 5 times. So this became a lot more. It didn't become 50, it became a lot more. It became like 10 raised to the power 5, okay? The energy over here. If we increase the current or we increase the milliamperes, the number of electrons which are released through this are increased. Do you get the difference? How would you increase? Yes, okay. So there's 2 things. If you increase the KVP, you will increase the amount, you will increase the energy of each electron, right? So it has 2 effects. One is that if there's more energy, it's more harmful to the body, right? That's a bad effect. The good, positive, beneficial thing is that if you have more energy, image produced of the X-ray is going to be clearer. It's going to have a higher contrast. Okay. Okay, so these two things over here, MA is the number of total electrons that are released are increased. So let's say over here, there's 3 electrons going through. I increase the current, and then there's 10 or 15 or 20 electrons going through. Yes, it can also make the image clearer. But what's the advantage of MA? It does not make it more harmful to the body. Because the energy is not increased. Okay, great. So these two things over here, this one called general radiation or breaking energy, and this one called characteristic radiation. Both of these different mechanisms by which X-rays are released from the tungsten material. Okay. So general radiation is basically so the principle behind this, let's talk about that first. So the principle behind this is that there is an electron and it's going towards the atom of the tungsten material, right? So what happens is this is positively charged. As the negatively charged atom starts going closer and closer to it, it starts decreasing in energy because it's working hard, it's working against this opposing. It's actually attracted to it, isn't it? Okay. There is a deceleration of electrons. Sorry, I got confused for a second. So there is a negative electron and there is a positive nucleus, right? So what happens is that this electron it's going towards this nucleus, but it's being opposed by these surrounding electrons. Okay, that's why the energy is decreasing. So as it goes closer and closer to the nucleus, the amount of energy is gradually decreasing, and so there is a deceleration of the electrons. Now a point comes where it starts interacting with this nucleus and it changes the direction. Okay, and the amount of energy which it consumes while slowing down is changed to the energy of the X-ray. Does that make sense? That's why it's called breaking energy. So we have negatively charged electrons. They are moving towards a positively charged nucleus, but they are resisting against negatively charged electrons. Yes, I realized the way I explained it was really weird. Okay, so there is an electron. It's being attracted towards the nucleus. But as it goes closer towards the nucleus, it slows down in speed because it's being repelled by these electrons outside. Right? It is slowly slowing down, and the energy lost over here is converted to the X-ray energy which is released. Does that make sense? Okay, that's basically all this is. So this is a type of, this is a mechanism by which a specific type of X-ray is released, okay? Now the second type is known as characteristic radiation. And basically what happens over here is that a negatively charged electron, so this incident electron over here, yes, because it decreases in energy because of the surrounding electrons. We'll get to the filter later, don't worry about it. So it decreases in energy because of the surrounding electrons, because it's trying to resist, or the surrounding electrons resist this incoming electron, right? Because negative repels negative. So it has to work hard in order to keep on going, right? So as its speed slows down, the energy that is used up in its slowing down will be consumed or released as X-rays. Okay. Okay. So the second one is known as characteristic radiation. And Oh my God, sorry. So the mechanism over here is that there's negatively charged electrons. So we have an electron, it's negatively charged. It hits another electron and knocks off that electron, okay? So basically this electron comes, it hits this electron, it knocks it out. Where is it? Okay, it knocked it out, and this one went back, okay? So this electron got knocked out, right? And once this electron got knocked out, this whole system or this whole atom became unstable, okay? So to stabilize an atom, an electron from the outer shell moves in towards the lower shell, and that stabilizes this atom, okay? So basically what happens is that this instant electron, it strikes with this electron which is already present inside this atom. It transfers all of its energy to this atom. This atom is released out. We don't care about this atom anymore, okay? This atom goes back. We don't care about this electron anymore as well, okay? So these two electrons are gone. The whole system becomes unstable because this thing moved out. There's nothing over here anymore. So an electron from the outer system moves inside. And once an electron from the outer system moves inside, this whole thing stabilizes, okay? Now, while this outer electron moves to an inner shell, what happens is that a lot of energy is released. And this energy is known as the characteristic X-ray photon. Does that make sense? Let me repeat it one more time. I'm sorry, I'm not going into the basics of the physics because it's been a long time, but let me try once more. So if an electron is circulating in the outer shells, it has more energy, okay? When an electron moves from the outer shell into an inner shell, it basically needs less energy. So once it needs less energy, it basically releases that energy, and that is converted to the energy of the X-ray, okay? So basically, when you knock out this atom, when you knock out this electron, this whole atom is unstable. How do you become more stable? You move down to a lower energy level. Once you move down to a lower energy level, the excess energy release is converted to X-ray, or it's released as X-ray. Does that make it better? I am slowly remembering physics that I used to remember a long time ago. Okay. So what do we mean by breaking radiation and characteristic radiation? Basically, let me try to move this a bit higher. Okay. So basically, you see this graph that's over here. We can see that there's, so go on to the next slide, maybe it's easier over there. Oh my God, where is, okay. This one's better. So basically, you can see that there is this low radiation, less amount of radiation that's released in a wide spectrum. And then there is specific amounts of energies which are released in very high quantities. Let me go back to make this clear. So you see how there is a lot of waves. Waves is the correct word. So a lot of waves which are released, right? And then there are some specific waves which are released in a lot of, in a very large amount or large dose, let's say. There's a large amount of waves which are released which have specific energies, such as, let's say, 11 kilo electron volts, 10 kilo electron volts, 8 kilo electron volts, right? There's a large amount of this energy that's released. And then there's another type of broad spectrum, which is has a lot of different variation of energy, but the amount of energy released is not so much, right? So these radiation, where the amount is not so much, but it varies across in its energy, is the general radiation. The characteristic radiation is this specific one, okay? And why is this specific? Because it correlates to the energy released when it travels from the outer shell to the inner shell. Does that make sense? Basically, what they're trying to tell you over here is that this lower side is the breaking radiation, and this is the characteristic radiation, okay? That's all they're trying to tell you. Is this clear so far? Okay, sure. Okay, so basically, let me put it in a simpler way for the people who are freaking out. If this comes to you, what they'll do is the question will be something like, they'll point to this and they'll ask you, what is this? And this part of the graph is general radiation. If they ask you what this is characteristic radiation, okay? Now for your understanding, let's go over here. So you see how when we are slowing down an electron, it can either be slowed down a lot or it can either be slowed down very little, right? So the amount of energy released over here is going to be very variable, and it's going to be little amount of energy or little amount of waves which are released, and they could vary from like very less energy to a lot of energy. Why? Because you can change the speed of the electron, which reduces, depends on a lot of factors, right? It depends on the number of electrons that it has to resist against. It depends on the angle it was going at, the initial speed, blah, blah, blah. It depends on a lot of factors, right? So this is why the amount of energy which is released is going to be across a large spectrum, but the amount of individual waves are going to be a lot smaller, okay? But then we have these two weird characteristic waves. Why are they in such a large amount? Because a lot of particles came in and they knocked out a lot of electrons, but the amount of energy released was equal. Let's say it was 10 kilo electrons, electron volts, right? So a lot of electrons came in and they knocked this out, and a lot of this 10 kilo electron volts were released here, and we see a lot of these counts are detected over here. Does that explain this better? This is the reason why. Okay. So I guess I have to go into like basic physics more for you guys to understand. Okay, cool. Sorry. Okay, so this was basically the most important part of this lecture in terms of understanding. So basically, characteristic radiation has more photons in less energy. No, it has more photons in specific energy, which is generally less. Yes, you're right. But over here, the thing that's important is that it's specific amount of energy. And yes, it has a generally, the energy that it has is less. You're right about that. Okay, so let's talk about the Hill effect. So this is, again, it's not important. I don't think they'll ever question you on this, but it's just for your understanding, okay? Basically, the Hill effect means that, let's say we have the cathode. Why is there three different characteristic waves? Because it's not only this electrons that's going down, right? In an actual tungsten material, there's going to be a lot. So there could be a shift from L to K, it could be a shift from M to L, and it could be another shift from M to L, right? So that's why there's three different characteristics, which correspond to the energy released. Okay, so the Hill effect, basically, okay, so can you repeat the lower parts of the graph again real quick? The lower parts, you mean this one? Okay, so this over here, this wide spectrum is produced due to breaking radiation, right? So as you can see, there are, let's say there's like 1 or 2 waves which are produced of 37, let's say joules, okay, volts, or let's say volts, okay? Let's say that there is 3 waves which are produced of 25 volts. Let's say there are 5 waves which are produced of 15 volts, right? So it's a large variation, but the amount of waves which are released are not a lot. So why is this part of the graph produced? Because it's produced due to this mechanism. The mechanism is that an electron will slow down once it's approaching the atom, and it will change its direction. And while it's slowing down and changing this direction, there's going to be a release of photons. Now, the amount of slowing down that happens is going to it could be anything, right? So when you're going in the car, you can reduce yourself from like 100 miles per hour to 50 miles or 30 miles or 10 miles or 5 miles. It doesn't matter, right? Or you have this choice, right? Similarly, there's going to be a lot of variation. It depends on the angle it's going at, the speed it was going at originally, the amount of electrons it encountered throughout, how close it was to the atom itself, right? So there's a lot of factors. So that's why there's going to be a lot of variation in the amount of energy released, but each wave is going to be of a small amount, right? So if you see on the y-axis, it says count, or let's say the amount of waves which have a specific energy. And over here, it says energy. This is basically telling you the energy of each wave. Clear? Okay. If it's not clear, I can repeat it again. I don't mind at all. Okay. So don't worry about this. What exactly is this graph? We'll get to it. Don't worry. We'll get to it. Okay. So now let's talk about Hill effect. Okay. So what is Hill effect? Basically, it's not important for you guys, but Hill effect basically means it's again another it's another phenomena that affects the amount of energy of the X-rays released. Okay. Basically, the idea is, oh my God, this is a bad picture. Okay. Basically, the idea is, can you guys see my cursor, or do I have to change it? Wait, let me try to change it. Okay. So the idea is that, you know how there's an angle over here, right? And you know how all of these electrons are going and hitting the tungsten over here. Now this angle is 45 degrees, and this 45-degree angle means that some of the X-rays produced will go this direction, some of them will go this direction, some of them will go this direction, right? So let's say we have this one electron which goes like this, and then it starts going back like this, okay? So the amount of distance it traveled inside the anode itself is only from, oh my God, wait, let me change this. Okay, so let's say that we have this one electron which went through until this point. Excuse me, just let me change the color. Can I change the color? Okay, never mind. So let's say it goes, can I use this? Okay, let's say an electron goes all the way like this, and then it comes back like this, okay? And then there's another electron. Yeah, it's not appearing for me for some reason, which goes like this, and then it goes like this, okay? So this electron which went backwards, the amount of distance it traveled within the anode is less as compared to the amount of distance that this one traveled in the anode, right? Again, if we have one electron which goes like this and comes back, the distance traveled within the anode is only from here till here. Oh my God, this pointer is bad. Color pointer, where are you? Pointer options in color. Thank God. Okay, so if we have an electron that goes like this, and then it starts coming back like this, the amount of distance traveled is from here all the way to here inside the anode, right? Now there's another electron which went like this, and let's say it traveled this way. So the amount of distance traveled from here through the anode is larger. Or let's say it was over here and now it's going down. So this distance is definitely larger than this distance, right? So the idea behind the Hill effect is that the X-rays which are produced over here will be of a higher energy as compared to the ones which are produced over here. Why? Because the more you travel inside the anode, the more you're going to lose energy, right? So X-ray is produced over here. Now it's traveling. It has to travel against this dense solid material. So it's going to lose energy. So the overall energy that we see at the detector is going to be less, is going to be higher over here as compared to this one, which is going to lose a lot more energy, okay? So basically, in summary, what they mean to say is the closer you are to the anode, over here, the less energy you will have as compared to this one over here. Because this is traveling less inside the anode. Is this part clear? Okay, great. So that's basically what they mean. So why is this important for us? Because this basically means that as we get this whole diagram, there's going to be a variation in this because of the Heal effect as well. No, up is not low energy. It does not coincide like that. No. What they mean to say over here is that you see how there is a variation over here. So one of the factors that contributes to this changing variation is due to the Heal effect. It's the amount of distance that's traveled within the anode. That's all they mean by this. You don't need to know any more detail about this, okay? Now, this picture over here, I have no clue what it means because this is not dependent on this. Both of these are not dependent on each other. Why? Because the Heal effect, it states that the X-rays will be produced of different intensities, okay? Over here, this is a graph of energy, okay? Intensity does depend on energy, but it's not the only factor that determines it, okay? There's a lot of other factors such as magnetic fields, blah, 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 okay? So this is why this graph is not representative of this, okay? So this image, I don't know why the doctor includes it in every year, but it's not related. Don't get confused, okay? Don't try to relate this part of it to this part because as you can see, this part is supposed to have high energy. Over here, this has low energy. Why? How do we know it's low energy? It's over here. This is the energy. This is the number of waves detected of a specific energy. This is not correlated to this, okay? It does not relate to the graph. That's what I'm telling you. Why does it not relate? Because firstly, what's over here? The unit over here is energy. What's the unit for Heal effect? The unit of Heal effect is intensity, okay? That's number one. Number two, Heal effect states that the further you are away from the anode, the higher energy you're going to have. But over here, this graph, the way these arrows are pointing, it points to low energy. So this is completely wrong, okay? Disregard it completely. You can't get a question on it. If you get a question on it, appeal it. It doesn't make sense, okay? Next. So what's the most important thing over here? The general radiation is this lower one over here, and the characteristic radiation is these peaks over here, okay? This cathode side, anode side, forget about it. I don't know why she included it, but I'm pretty sure it does not make sense, okay? If she asks you in the exam, just answer it because you may not be able to appeal it because it's in the slides, you know, how this uni works. Anyway, moving on. Do you have any questions so far? Yes, the closer to the anode, the more energy it will lose. So general radiation has higher energy. No, yes, it does, but we'll explain that in a later slide, so don't get confused about it yet. Okay, so X-ray interaction, X-ray photons may be absorbed or scattered, just like visible light. Okay. Okay. Why is there no information in these slides at all? So basically, the smaller the angle, the higher the energy remaining. The smaller the angle, the higher the energy remaining. You have a larger angle, How about you say it like this? So if you have a smaller angle, the less variation between the energy. The less variation between the rays produced over here and the rays produced over here. Let's put it that way. Okay. If you have a larger angle, there's going to be a more spectrum because these will have more energy as compared to before. And it's not energy remaining. All of it is detected over here. We're not talking about remaining energy yet, okay? Okay, so let's talk about X-ray interaction. So now we're done with the parts of the X-ray being produced. So what happened, there was a cathode, there was an anode, it hit the tungsten material emitted X-rays using two mechanisms. One of it was breaking radiation, the other one was characteristic radiation. That's it, okay? Now, moving on, now what they're going to talk about is going to be about when it is going through the person himself, okay? Now they're talking about the X-rays passing through a person and being either absorbed or scattered. So, or reflected. So what basically this slide, what it's trying to tell you is that if you have very low energy of an X-ray, it may not be able to travel to the person's body, right? Then if you have a bit higher energy, it'll travel to the person's body, but it won't be able to penetrate through the whole thing because as it's going through it, it will lose all of its energy. And then if you have a really high energy, what's going to happen is that it's going to go all the way through it, penetrate it, and then reach the detector, which is behind, and then produce the image, okay? So basically, the higher the energy, the better the penetrating power, the better it is for us for image production, generally, okay? Basically, what they're trying to tell you is that, remember how there's a spectrum over here? So not all of this spectrum is going to be useful for us. We basically want a very specific amount, or we want X-rays which are of a specific energy, which are not low enough that they are absorbed altogether, but they are not very, very high in energy, because the higher they are in energy, the more dangerous they are to the person, right? So that's basically the idea over here. Now, X-ray beam collimation, basically there are different columns of X-rays that you can send out, and the narrower the column, the more focused the beam. We'll get to this. I will explain this further. Okay, let's go to this first. What is the use of a filter? Oh, you have questions. The closer to anodes, yes. Basically, the smaller the energy, the higher. Okay. So by way energy, you mean the energy released? Yeah. So the energy released is converted to the energy of the X-ray photons, right? That's what I mean. If the electrons far away from the anode, they will have more energy. Yes. You're right. If the electrons are far away from the anode, they will have more energy due to the heat effect. Okay. So now let's talk about why we need a filter in image production. So basically, we want to get only the high energy radiation, right? Because the lower ones, it'll just be absorbed in the body and it will damage the body and won't be able to produce an image, right? So basically what we do is we apply a filter over here so that we get only the specific bracket of energy that we need. And basically you can see that the filter is increasing as it's going further back. So the lowest energy X-rays, which are not going to be able to penetrate the body, are just being absorbed. And the ones which are going to penetrate it, those are the useful ones for us. So we're basically reducing the total amount of radiation the patient is exposed to because we want to reduce the damage to the patient. That's the slide. This is why we use filters, okay? So remember how in this slide over here, it said filter removes these waves. Filters removes not these waves, but filter removes the unneeded waves, okay? It includes both part of characteristic radiation and general radiation. We don't care which one it reduces. We're looking at the energy of specific waves, okay? So over here, this is the same concept again. So if it's very low energy wave, we don't need it because alpha will be absorbed. It won't produce the image. So we'll use these ones. So the filter over here is lower. And then very high is going to be dangerous to the patient, so we want to block these off as well. That's basically what it's saying. Yeah, exactly. So this is the patient, this is the filter behind, and this is where the image is going to be produced. Okay. So basically, when we're producing an X-ray image, we want to have the source. We want the X-rays to go through the filter, through the person, and be detected over here at the back. And once it is detected at the back, we see it as an image. Okay. So again, we have the X-ray tube, we have the object, and we have an image detected. What is this slide? Invisible X-ray image. Okay, we'll get to this. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about over here is basically once it reaches the patient. Okay, so far we have not reached the patient himself. Now we are finally going to reach the patient. Okay, so over here, it's basically trying to tell you that X-ray interacts with matter in different ways. So this was my dad being very nice to me and giving me some tea. Okay, sorry about that. So basically, what we have here is X-rays reaching a person. Now, what they're trying to tell you is that there are 4 or 5 different mechanisms, whatever, we don't care how many. There's different mechanisms by which the X-rays affect the matter once it collides with it or interacts with it. Okay, so these are 4 different phenomena. We're only going to talk about these 2, thankfully, because this is the ones that they focused on over here. Okay, so the first one is known as the Compton scatter effect, and basically the idea over here. Let's go to this one. Basically, the idea over here is that there's going to be a high energy photon, which basically means an X-ray of high energy, and it goes and collides with the atom of the human being over here, and basically it causes an electron to be released, and this original photon changes its direction and loses energy. Why? Because it basically transfers some of its energy to this atom, and this electron, and this electron is released. Okay. Now, what's important to note over here is that firstly, the incoming X-ray is of a high energy. The outgoing X-ray is of a lower energy. And why is it of a lower energy? Because it transfers some of its energy to this electron over here. The other thing to note is that this electron, which it transfers its energy to, is generally going to be in the outer shell. Okay. And since it's in the outer shell, it's easier to knock out. That's why it's able to knock it out. The third thing is that this energy, the direction of this energy or this X-ray wave is changed over here, right? So how is this important to us? 2 things. One is that this electron is removed from the outermost shell of the human being, right? This is the electron of the human being. Once we have electron removal, this electron removal is going to cause a lot of damage, because this whole thing that's remaining is going to turn into a free radical, and that's going to damage the human body. Okay, so basically this is how we're going to get damaged by the X-ray. That's number 1. Number 2, why is it important? Because see how the direction of this X-ray changed. So when we're producing an image, we want the X-rays to go at a very particular direction, right? So this scattered off energy, which is the scattered off X-ray, which is not in the direction it was supposed to go, is no longer of use to us. So it's going to interfere with the image production, and it's going to decrease the quality of the image. Is that clear so far? Okay, so what do we have over here? We have an image which was of higher contrast, but if we do not exclude the scatter, what's going to happen is that there's going to be an image of lower contrast, or the quality is going to decrease. Yes, I'll tell you now. Okay, the picture isn't here. Great. Okay. Basically, we want very specific direction of X-rays to pass through to generate an image on our detector, right? if we're going to have the scattering of these photons, it's going to interfere with the image production. So you see how this one is a lot more crisp than this one? Why is this less crisp? Because X-rays are bouncing off here and there, and then they are basically interfering with the image. I don't know how to simplify this. So basically, this image that's being produced is by all of the rays which are, wait, I think I have a better picture for you. This one here, okay, let's say this one here. So over here, this image is produced with all the scattering of the light rays. So you know how when an image is produced, it has to be like parallel to each other, basic physics. If the light beams are parallel to each other, then they will produce a good image. If they are diffused light rays, they're going to not produce a good image. So this is when we don't have the scatter, this is when we have the scatter. Does that make sense? So when the electron leaves, this makes the atom unstable and has the damage. Yes, you're right. That's basically it. There's going to be an imbalance between the positive and negatively charged particles, and that's going to lead to a free radical formation. Remember how in the last time when we were talking about the characteristic radiation, we said that there's going to be an atom that's going to move out from the higher energy level to a lower energy level? Well, over here, there's no other atom around it. So it can't get stabilized. That's why it's going to be damaging to the body. Scatter decreases image quality. The more scatter you have, the more crisscross you have of the image. And that's why you cannot have a image of a good quality. Okay, so again, very, very important. This is why we need to distinguish. When we were talking about X-ray production, that's where we had the KVP, that's where we had the MA, okay? Over here, KVP and MA is related to this part, okay? And then this part. Now we're talking about what happens in the patient himself, okay? So there's a lot of factors that go into image quality. One of them is KVP, one of them is MA. That is when the image is being produced. Then once it is actually interacting with the patient, once it's actually passing through the human being, this is the human being over here. Once it's actually passing through the human being, we will have this Compton scatter, we'll have the photoelectric effect, all of these effects. Before it passes to this human being, we apply the filter. Why? Because we want to deal with the characteristic radiation, we want to deal with the breaking radiation, the image production. Once we are done with the image production, now we have moved on to the interaction of the human being with the X-ray. Does that make sense? Perfect. Okay, so Compton scatter, it's basically one of the phenomena which causes decrease in image quality, and we also want, yeah, basically let's keep it till here for now, okay? Now, again, how did we say most of the interaction is with the unbound electrons because they're in the outermost shell? Energy is higher than the binding energy. Oh my God, why did they have to do this? Okay, so basically what they mean is this electron is bound to this nucleus by a specific amount of energy. When the X-ray comes, the X-ray, the only way it's able to displace this is if this X-ray has a higher energy than the binding energy of these two, okay? So if it's higher in energy, only then can it knock it out, right? That's basically what this means. So then we have this added image, which basically tells you the Compton effect. Then we already explained this. The more Compton effect you have, the more scatter you have, the decrease in image quality, okay? Okay, now over here, this thing over here is basically telling you the higher the KVP that you have, the more Compton scatter that you have. This is an additional picture. It's not related to your course, so forget about it. Don't get into this detail. This was basically a guy on YouTube trying to explain how to reduce Compton effects, okay? But he was not talking about X-rays overall, so don't be confused. Now let's talk about photoelectric effect, okay? So photoelectric effect is basically the second mechanism we're going to talk about about the interaction between the human body and the X-rays. So what happens over here, remember how we said that the binding energy over here is going to be higher and that's why it's going to knock it off? Well, over here, we have another X-ray which is going in to an electron which is in one of the inner orbits. And basically it's going to knock this one out, okay? Basically what happens is that the X-ray in this case is going to transfer all of its energy. It's going to transfer all of this energy. Okay, so it's going to transfer all of its energy to this electron here, and it's going to knock it out. Okay, so what happens? What happens is that there is going to be another electron of a higher energy, which is going to replace this one, and this is going to release energy. Now, this energy could be in the form of X-ray, or it could be just in the form of heat, right? Or it could be in the form of some other electromagnetic radiation. Okay, basically what it's trying to tell you is that this is another method by which energy is converted from X-rays to some other form of energy. Okay, so over here it generally takes place when the energy of the photon is much higher than the binding energy of the electron. Again, as we said, the energy is absorbed, as we said, and the energy increases with atomic number. Okay, cool. Just memorize this. It's just trying to tell you that the amount of energy that's needed to displace this is going to increase as the atomic number of the material increases. Okay, not that important. Basically, it's just trying to tell you that it's another effect that causes the interaction between the human body and the X-ray. Okay. Okay, one more thing about photoelectric effect, the special thing about this. Now, the photoelectric effect, basically you have an X-ray, the X-ray is no longer present afterwards, okay? The Compton effect, the X-ray was present beforehand, after as well, okay? Over here, we have an X-ray. Over here, the X-ray has been completely stopped and it has converted to a different form of energy. Now, let's say we have a detector over here, right? Now, if okay, now let's not talk about this here. Let's just say that there is an X-ray over here and it is transferring all of its energy over here and it's going to create a photoelectron. Okay, that's basically the effect they want you to know about. The energy is much higher than the binding energy. Okay, it's the same thing as we said before. Okay, now let's talk about the third one. I don't want to get into more details of this because it's not needed for you guys and it will confuse you because it has something to do with the interaction of the detector as well, but I don't want to explain that to you, okay? So the third one is elastic scatter. And basically what it's trying to tell you is that this one does not contribute to image formation. Energy before is same as energy after. So you have an X-ray, it goes here, it interacts with this particle, doesn't do anything to it, and is just released. And the energy before is the same as after. 10% of these 10% of the total X-rays will interact in this method. And the important thing is that it will not contribute to image formation. That's why it's useless for us. Basically, it's going to not help us out. The reason why they call it elastic is because the amount of energy before and after is the same, whereas in the Compton effect, it's inelastic because the amount of energy before is greater than the amount of energy after. Okay, that's all that's important over here. I honestly think they won't bring you any questions from this. The significance of all of these is that all three of these are going to interact with the X-ray, and either they're going to change the direction of the X-ray, or they're going to change it into a photoelectron of a different substance, or it's going to release it as heat over here, or it's going to again change the direction, the X-ray is no longer moving. Whatever the case is, they're telling you that that these are factors which hinder image production. That's all they're trying to tell you over here, okay? I'm going into a lot more details because, as I said, this is more for your understanding. It has almost very little value when it's related to your exam, okay? Okay, so image formation, we'll talk about this in the CT lecture. Okay. X-ray image formation. Okay, so basically what they're trying to tell you over here is that, forget about this, but what they're trying to tell you is that the different structures in our body are made up of different densities, right? So the amount of X-rays which are going to be blocked due to the different intensities will cause a difference in the image production. Okay, so as you can see over here, this is a chest X-ray. So if you see over here, the bones are going to be appearing the brightest. Why are they appearing the brightest? Because they are going to stop the most amount of X-rays. Whereas the air is going to appear the darkest because most of the X-rays cross through this. Okay, that's what they're trying to tell you here. So this is how it usually is. This is going to be the source, and it's going to produce the X-rays, and then all of the characteristic radiation, breaking radiation, whatever is going to happen over here. Once this is done, the filter is applied before it's released from here. Okay, once the filter is applied, it goes all the way to the human. In the human, it has the Compton effect, it has the other inelastic, elastic effects, photoelectric effect, whatever. And then it finally goes to the detector, and it is detected as an image. Okay. Over here, it's telling you if you increase the dose, it's going to increase the scatter. So it's going to increase the Compton effect, and that's going to interfere with the image production because now they're going in different directions, and it's going to decrease the image quality. So what do we do to prevent all of the Compton effect, blah, 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 that we discussed before? What are we going to do? We're going to place a grid between this and the film. So if you have a film, if you have a grid, which is basically going to stop all the scattering of the X-rays, we're going to have only the X-rays that we need that are useful to us, and we're going to have a better image. So that's why we have a filter. We have a filter over here, and then we have a grid over here. The filter is for the either very low or very high energy X-rays, and the grid over here is for the scattering which is produced when it interacts with the human being. That's all you need to know over here. The second thing that we can do to reduce the scatter is that we can reduce the gap between the object and the receptor. Why? Because the X-rays which are passing through here, which are useful for us, are going to be detected over here. But since there is gap over here, so we're allowing this scattering of light to go far away. So this whole light is not useful for us. Cool? That's all it's trying to tell you. Yes, the grid is between the patient and the detector. Okay. So all of this was basically image production. Okay. How does the X-ray stay straight after passing through the body? So it depends. Remember how we have a spectrum of X-rays. So some of the X-rays which are of higher energy are going to be able to penetrate throughout. They won't be stopped by the bone, right? Some of them will be stopped by the bone. Some of them will be stopped by the skin. Some of them will be stopped by the different tissues, right? So that's why the ones which are able to penetrate through fully will not be affected by any of the structures in between, and we will get the image. Okay. So increase space between, yes, it increases image quality because it reduces the scatter. Okay. So now let's talk about image quality. There's 3 parameters that you're supposed to know. These 3 terms, just understand them and understand the factors which affect them. It's basically memorization for you guys. Okay. So what is spatial resolution? Spatial resolution is the ability to distinguish between 2 adjacent lines. So for example, think of it as like low resolution, high resolution. The higher the resolution, the more you are able to tell 2 points two adjacent points as 2 different structures. So for example, over here, I can't really make out any of these tiny lines that I can make out over here, right? So basically spatial resolution is the ability to distinguish between 2 distinct lines, okay? Next, we have the contrast resolution. Contrast resolution refers to the shade of the grayscale. So this is a bad contrast image. The contrast resolution over here is low. Why? Because I can only see white and I can only see black. Over here, I can see white, I can see gray, I can see darker gray, I can see black as well, right? So this has higher contrast resolution. Spatial resolution, 2 distinct points, contrast resolution, the color difference in between. And last, we have temporal resolution. Temporal resolution basically means the frames per image. And this is useful when we are making a video. So you know how if you have more frames per image, you guys know this, everyone has an iPhone. You know, if you have more frames per image, you're going to have a better video quality. That's basically what it means. Temporal is related to the time. So if you have higher temporal resolution, you have a higher resolution of the video quality. Okay, very simple to understand. Basically over here, you just have to memorize this. Contrast resolution. What is contrast resolution? Difference between the colors. Contrast resolution depends, or how to increase it. You increase it by changing the material of the anode. So remember how we talked about a tungsten material? If you want to increase it in a let me talk about this again. So mammography is a specific type of X-ray that we use to detect breast cancer, okay? Over here, since breast is a very, it's a less dense tissue as compared to the bone, that's why we will use X-rays of less intensity or less energy, because we don't need that much, because if we use a higher energy X-ray, it's going to, alpha is just going to pass through and we won't get the contrast that we need. We won't get the differentiating color that we need, and it's going to be a lot more harmful to the patient, right? So what do we do in mammography specifically to increase the contrast resolution? We will use this different material and we will use less kVp. Make sense? No. So all of these will have a higher giver quality when they're higher. Not necessarily. If it's too high, it will result in an image like this. If it's too high, it's going to result in an image like this. If it's too low, everything will be white. So we need to find a fine balance depending on the structure that we are going to be looking at. So in a chest X-ray, we have bones, right? So we're going to use higher energy. In the mammography, we have no bones, so we're going to use less energy, okay? Yeah, temporal resolution is basically number of frames per second. So the number of frames per second basically means the number of photographs that you are taking in 1 second, okay? So just imagine if you're taking 1 million photographs per second, you're going to have a very, very good video quality, whereas if you're taking 2 photographs per second, it's going to be very, very blurry image. Basically what happens to the Zoom call when I am having bad internet quality, right? It's going to be a bad image quality. That's all they're telling you. Temporal, the word temporal is related to time. They're talking about the number of frames which are captured, number of frames of X-rays which are captured per second. Okay. So how do we reduce radiation dose, and why do we need to reduce radiation dose? Because the higher the radiation dose, the more dangerous it is to the patient, right? So how can we reduce this? We can reduce this by decreasing the kVp, we can reduce this by decreasing the MA, and we can also reduce the scatter and the air gap. The less scatter we have, the less total amount of radiation that we will need to apply to get a clear image. So this will also help us out, okay? Again, we have to balance between the image quality and the radiation to the person, okay? Now, these are just 3 links that I added just to I think this is like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, just to give you a better understanding of these. You can watch these at your own time and this will make it a lot easier. No, okay. So the way scatter is related to radiation dose is, let's say we are getting a lot of scatter, okay? So what will we do? We will apply filters and we will apply an air gap. If we're applying both of these, we don't have to use these methods of increasing kVp and increasing MA to increase the image quality, right? So basically we can get a better image at a lower energy. That's basically what it means by reducing scatter, okay? How do we reduce kVp? So remember how we discussed, if we are going to change the current through the initial, if we're going to increase the current through this, we will increase the MA. If we decrease the current through this, we will decrease the MA. How do we increase the kVp? We will increase the potential difference between these two. Okay, so basically these are under our control. Cool so far? Either we get a bad image quality if we use a very high, if we use a very high energy, we get a very bad image quality. Why? Because all the X-rays will pass through and everything will appear black. The second thing is the higher the energy, the more damaging it is going to be for us, right? That's basically the end of this lecture. So to summarize, and the things that you need for the exam, you want to memorize these facts. You want to memorize what does kVp relate to? It relates to the energy. What does Ma relate to? It relates to the number of electrons. You want to know that there are two different types of radiation, and this is in X-ray production. And characteristic radiation is over here, and breaking radiation is over here. The Heal effect also contributes to the spectrum of energy which is produced over here. That's all you need to know. How do we deal with the unwanted radiation? We will apply a filter between the source and before it's released to the patient. Then once we are talking about the patient himself, some other factors can reduce image quality. What are these? These are the scatter, Compton scatter, photoelectric effect, elastic recoil, and pair production. Compton scatter, what happens is that it changes the direction of the X-ray. In the photoelectric effect, it gets rid of the X-ray altogether. It just stops the X-ray or converts it to another form. Okay, and that basically affects the image quality. The image itself is there's going to be a contrast of colors depending on the densities of the materials which it's passing through. The more it's going to penetrate, the darker it's going to appear. The less it's able to penetrate, the lighter it appears. So the bones appear to be brighter because they are denser and they do not allow the X-rays to pass through, or they allow less X-rays to pass through. To reduce the scatter, in image production, we produce the grids, and then, or we increase the gap between the person and the detector. And that basically helps us with the image quality. There are three types of image quality. There are three types of resolutions you need to know about. Spatial resolution is the ability to distinguish between 2 points. So over here, I can't tell the finer details apart, but I can tell a lot more over here. The contrast resolution is the difference in color. So over here, there's shades of gray, and over here, there's just black and white. And temporal resolution over here is basically just telling you about video quality. Mammography, you want to know, in mammography specifically, you will decrease kVp. The kVp over here is less than 35 because that's closer to the breast tissue. And again, you will use a material which has less, which will produce X-rays of lesser energy because we want to get a better image and we want to decrease the amount of total radiation dose. Okay, the last point over here is that its high spatial resolution is improved by small focal point. What does that mean? So what is spatial resolution? It's the ability to tell them as two distinct objects. So what they're saying is basically, if I want to improve the spatial resolution, I will have to use a small focal point. What does that mean? Basically, that means I will use a smaller aperture. That means that the hole that the X-ray passes through is going to be tinier. So there's going to be a more focused X-ray. So basically, this point over here, this point over here is what they were trying to explain over here in a very bad way. This thing over here. So if you have just one beam which is focused, it's going to have a higher spatial resolution as opposed to a wide beam. Okay, that's what they're trying to tell you. Cool so far? Okay, let's go to your questions. More gap, better image quality, yes, because it will decrease the amount of Compton effect. See, all of these, what we're basically trying to tell you is that we have these effects and we have these ways of reducing these effects to improve image quality. That's all they're trying to explain to you, okay? No, just convert it to another form. The principle of photoelectric effect is that all of the energy of the X-ray is transferred to the electron. So only the electron is now released. The X-ray is stopped because all of the energy of it is gone. Okay. Again, if you took basic physics, this helps out a lot, because in basic physics you learn how a wave can also be regarded as a particle, and a particle can also be regarded as a wave. Okay, so it's just photons can be interchanged with electrons over here and vice versa. Okay. Okay, now we spent a lot more time than I originally planned. We spent 20 minutes extra, and I'm sure a lot of you are tired by now. So do you want me to continue, or do you want a break? It's up to you guys. I'm fine either way. Okay, so the good news is every lecture after this is going to be smaller. We're done with the most difficult to explain lecture. Okay. The bad news is the more we go further from here, the more rote memorization there is. I'm sorry, this is how your pre-midterms or exams are going to be. They're going to be like more boring compared to the later half, in which you're going to actually go to image interpretation and all of the cool stuff. Yeah, sure. We can have a 5 minutes break to pray. Why not? Okay, so I will stop sharing my video and mute myself and give you a 5 minutes break, and we will resume at 7:50. Okay, let's resume at 8. Okay. alaikum. Are people back? Okay. Shall we start? Or do you want to wait like 2-3 minutes?
No, I think you can go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So now we're going to talk about CTs. Okay. So the thing about CT scans is first they discovered X-rays, and then they discovered that there are some limitations of X-rays, right? And then they started doing a lot of X-rays at once. And since there was advancement in computers and computers could process images, what they did was they took a lot of X-rays at once, they combined the whole thing, and then they saw a lot more detail. And they called that computed tomography, or CT. Okay, that's basically what happened. So the general working of the CT image depends on the X-rays. So all of X-rays are used there. All of the principles that we talked about earlier, such as how it's produced, the heel effect, this stuff, which I'll talk about, everything is the same as X-rays. Okay, so this is where the differences begin. So the thing about X-rays, why do they have these? Okay. So basically, I haven't gone through these slides before. And now I'm discovering that they have different animations, which is cool. Okay, okay, so basically the reason why they started the CT was because they could find some information that they can identify. They can identify that this is not something that's normal, but they don't know if it is behind the patient, if it's in front of the patient, is it in the chest wall itself, is it just on the surface of the chest wall, is it in the back, is it close to the spine? They can't really tell this. So this is why what they did was, okay, we'll ignore this for a second. What they did was they took a 3D image, and that's became the CT. Okay, so basically, what is this? What is this? Okay, so basically what they're trying to tell you over here, the only reason I'm telling you this, I'll explain this in a lot more detail in the later slides, but basically this is a chest X-ray, okay? I'm sure you guys know this by now. So what they're trying to tell you is what is a posterior rib and what is an anterior rib, okay? So the way you tell this apart is the posterior ribs, think of it like this. Think of you wearing a hoodie, okay? Or putting your hands inside the pockets of a hoodie. So the way it goes is that you will go like this, and then you will put your hands downwards, okay? So these ones, which are going parallel over here, are the posterior ribs. And once they go like this, the ones over here are anterior ribs. I have no idea. I literally have zero idea why she put this here, but this is a posterior rib and this is an anterior rib, okay? Forget about it. For now, you'll talk about this post-midterm, okay? Yes, they're ribs. You're right. Okay, so XCT uses, okay, fine, general X-ray. Okay, so let me just read this out for you because we're going to talk about this in the other slides. So a general X-ray image is produced by a single projection of many X-rays on the detector to create a single image, okay? And a contrast, a grayscale image on the X-ray is additive for all the attenuations taking place along the path of the X-ray beams. Okay, so firstly, what does the word attenuation mean? Attenuation basically means absorption of the X-ray, okay? So it's basically telling you that this image produced is basically the image that we see over here. Let's use a blue color. And let's, okay. So, but basically what they're telling you is that this final image is basically produced by one X-ray going like this and then interacting with first the skin, then let's say the heart, then let's say the vertebra, and then let's say the skin again. And basically what you get over here is the final product, which is the addition of all the attenuations or all of it's being blocked by all of the different substances, and what we see is this one end result. Okay, so basically what it's telling you is that the contrast that we get, this gray and white and black contrast that we get, is because of the different structures. But the idea is all of it, the X-ray, one X-ray is passing through all of these different materials. Okay, whereas what they did in CT was they took one image like this, one image like this, one image like this, and once they had all of these images, they were able to get different projection, multiple projections, and then they made they made a CT image. Okay, so this is one set of projections, and it has only one set of attenuations. You have more, and then you compile all of them up by the help of a computer, and then you generate a matrix, and this matrix is translated to pixels, which is basically translated to image. Okay, so they're just trying to tell you that you have a lot of X-rays at different angles, and they somehow work it out with the computer, and they give you a three-dimensional image. That's all the previous slides were about. Okay. No, it's not multiple X-ray tubes. Okay, we'll get to this as well. Okay, but it's not multiple X-ray tubes. It's just one X-ray tube. They move it around the patients. Okay. So optimizing image quality. Again, most of these questions, again, see, the person who is giving you this herself is a radiologist. Okay, so the things that she's focusing on is just imaging production and what affects image quality. There's a lot of other details that radiology technicians have to know that they're just trying to skip out for you. So the problem in the exam is most of it is just going to be simple recall. Okay, so that's why, again, image quality, we have different types of resolution. Okay, so there's something known as attenuation coefficient, which basically means that there is different tissues going around, which causes different types of different amounts of absorption of the X-rays. So again, spatial resolution in CT. The spatial resolution, what was it? It was the ability to distinguish between two adjacent points as distinct objects. So this is better image spatial resolution. Again, this is spatial resolution. What they're saying is if you decrease the detector size, you will increase the spatial resolution. They're not actually decreasing the detector size itself. They're just processing the image into smaller chunks, you know, and that makes the pixels, that increases image quality, like they do on the screen of phone, right? There's nothing different. Now, this is the main difference between CT interpretation and X-ray. So far, the majority has been similar. Okay. Attenuation in X-ray is just linear. It's just you take an image from one projection, so you take an image from one place, and then the attenuation is throughout the person's body, and that's it. The different structures in the body contribute to it, but there's no other factors that contribute to it, right? In a CT, since you're going all around, there's going to be a lot more factors which are going to play into it, and you will have a lot more detail, so you can look at a lot more structures in a lot more detail, okay? So basically, attenuation, again, it is the amount, or it is a measure of the absorption or blockage of the X-ray, okay? So different amounts, different materials block the X-ray to different degrees. This formula over here at the top, I don't know if you have to memorize it or not. Just memorize it just in case. I'm telling you, the first one is just memorization. Okay, so basically what they do is they wanted a unit now. They've developed a CT and they were all happy about it. Now they wanted a unit of measurement to be able to compare different stuff. So what they thought of setting the standard with was water. Why did they choose water? Because the human body is 70% water, so it's the most prevalent form of atoms in the human body, right? So they chose that as the standard. So what they did was they called it Hounsfield units, and they chose that as 0. So anything that has a higher density will have a higher Hounsfield unit, and anything that has a lower density will have a negative Hounsfield unit. Okay. Now again, the less attenuation there is, the darker the image will appear. So that's why air appeared black, and that's why bones appeared to be white. Okay. Everything clear so far? Yes, so basically what I said at the end was, let's say you have a bone, okay? Bone can absorb more X-rays. It's able to block more X-rays because it's denser, right? So imagine bone is denser, it's able to absorb more X-rays or block more X-rays. Now, since it's able to absorb more or block more, we gave it a higher Hounsfield unit. Now, since it's a bone, it appears to be lighter as compared to air, which appears to be darker, because all the X-rays are passing through here, but not all of them are passing through here, or relatively less are passing through here. So the bone appears to be white, and the air appears to be darker. This, by the way, is a CT of the chest, and this is the heart, this is the sternum, this is the vertebra. So you're basically looking at a person who was standing, and then they cut him in a transverse section, okay? Is the spatial resolution become better when we decrease the detector size? No, it's not the detector size, it's the pixels. If we increase the amount of pixels. The detector size, basically, it's talking about the number of detectors, let's say, or the size. But yeah, basically. So bone kind of causes high attenuation for the X-ray. It definitely causes high attenuation of the X-ray, yes. You can replace the word attenuation by absorption, and it makes complete sense. Or blockage, let's say. Okay. Attenuate basically means to decrease something. So what's happening? X-rays are being decreased because they are being blocked off by the higher dense bones. Okay. But these are all relative terms. Okay. So higher as compared to water, as compared to air. Okay. We're comparing everything to water. Next, we have contrast resolution. Again, what was contrast resolution? It was the ability to distinguish between different grayscales. Okay. Now, this is kind of important. How do we have contrast resolution in CT scan? So remember how I said that this is an image of a chest CT? Well, if you look over here, this is also an image of a chest CT. This is also an image of a chest CT. But what is the difference between these? Yeah, so different objects are appearing to be at different colors, right? No. There's no change in KPA. Everything was same, but we're getting different images. Okay. Basically, what we're doing is, let me try to highlight it for you so it makes sense. So in this image over here, what they're doing is they want to look at the lung fields. Okay. So what they did was over here they're focusing on the lung fields. Okay. You can see the images. You can see the differences inside the lung fields, but everything else appears to be either very bright or very dark. Okay. Over here, this is again a lung field. Okay. But over here, you can see differences in the air fields, but everything beside it appears to be a lot white or a lot dark. Okay. This is really black and this is really light. Over here, what they're focusing on is the mediastinal tissue. What is the mediastinal tissue? Everything except for the lung fields. Okay. So the lung fields appear to be really, really black, and everything else has this whole shades of gray. Okay. How are they doing this? No, T1, T2 is an MRI. Forget it. Contrasted the area, you do have contrast in CT, but this is not the case here. What they're doing is basically, remember how we said that CT scan, it goes through a whole combination of processing by the computer. So basically, once you get the end product in a CT scan, you can change the window. What do we mean by the window? Basically, remember how we said that Hounsfield unit 0 is water. So if we set Hounsfield we set water to, or let's say we took the baseline as water, okay, when we didn't do any modification to the system, okay? But if, for example, I want to look at the different structures in between the lung fields, what I can do is I can set the baseline to a particular value. Let's say, for example, it's 30 Hounsfields. I don't know the exact value, but let's say it's 30 Hounsfields. That's my baseline now. So everything above it will be lighter, 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 lighter. Everything below it will be darker, 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 darker. So what will happen is I'll be able to see the lung fields more clearly. Why am I able to do this in a CT? Because the different tissues have different densities, and it's being processed a lot more by the computer. So basically, I tell the computer, listen, I want my baseline to be this lung field. So a slight difference in the lung field, I can see it as different colors, okay? But if there's a large difference in the lung fields, in the densities between the tissue of the lung fields as compared to the densities of other organs, it's going to either make it fully white or fully black. One more time. What did we do? We changed our baseline. We changed our window, okay? Basically, the window means that the shades of gray I will have is going to be in this particular bracket. Let's say it's between 10 to 30 Hounsfield units. My baseline is 20. Everything that is from 10 to 30, I'll be able to see in different shades of gray. Anything that is below 10 is going to be completely black. Everything that is higher than 30 is going to be completely white, because I want to focus on the lungs, and the lungs have the range of 10 to 30 Hounsfield units. The baseline I set was 20. Does that make sense again? Or do you want me to repeat it another way? Yes. So let me explain it in another way. So we have different types of tissues in the body, right? We have the lungs, we have the heart, and we have the bones in the chest, right? We're just focusing on the chest. Now, I am a radiologist, and I want to know if this person has any problem with their lung fields, okay? I want to know if the person has pneumonia. I want to focus only on the lungs. Now, I know that the lung is of a lesser density as compared to the heart and as compared to the bones. How do I know this? The lung has a lot of air, right? Basic knowledge. So now I know that the lung tissue is a lot less dense. So what will I do? I will set a window. The window basically means that anything in between this window will appear as shades of gray. Anything outside this window, either it will appear completely black or completely white, okay? So what I do is, we already know what the specific range for, let's say, the lungs are, okay? What the doctor will do is, on the computer, he will just select lung window, and he'll select it to just use those frequencies of Hounsfield units, okay? So if the frequency of Hounsfield units, let's say, is between 10 and 30, okay? Anything that is less than 10, it'll be completely dark. Anything that is brighter than 30, more than 30, will appear to be completely white. So all the contrasts that I will see in colors are going to be between 10 and 30, which means that even a minute difference in the lung tissue itself, I will be able to know what the problem is. No, that's just an example. 10 and 30 is just an example. It's not the lung window. No, the lung window is basically the whole color spectrum that I want to set, and I choose which tissues I want to place it between. Yeah, so the lung tissue in this example is 10 to 30, yes. So the idea is, I want to be able to detect minute differences in the lung tissue, but the heart is, there's no way it's going to be like, there's no way it's going to be, let's say 25, it's going to be 50 or 70, you know? So over here, what I did over here was, the heart is going to be a lot more, right? So it's going to be appearing white. So the idea is, I don't focus on this because I want to look at these details. This is what the differentiation in color is all about. Because at the end of the day, I want to look at the pathology over here. I don't care about the heart at this point. Once I care about the heart, I will change it to another bracket. Let's call it 50 to 100. And that's going to be my mediastinal window. And then everything between these structures and all the structures that fall between this are going to be between different shades of gray. But if something is more dense than this, for example, the bones, they appear to be completely white. This stuff appears to be completely white. Why? Because this is having a higher density than the structures that were supposed to be inside the mediastinal window. Yes, you basically narrow down the window so you can clearly focus on the target organ with even minute differences being visible and everything else. Yes, exactly. Yeah, so what I mean by the baseline is 20 is like, you know, you always compare something and you go up and down, right? So if I chose my window 10 to 30, what's the number in the middle? It's going to be 20. So that was my baseline. So for example, over here, water appears to be this color of gray. So now when I set my baseline, I change my baseline. So whatever, let's say I change my baseline to 20. Whatever lung tissue correlates to 20 is going to appear with this color. Everything that appears to be, let's say, 15 is going to be either darker, and anything that appears to be more than this baseline is going to be lighter. That's what I meant by baseline. I meant set the middle value to something else. So any pathology will show different Heinz-field than normal Heinz-field unit. Okay, so Heinz-field units is just a measurement of the density, right? But the window, I can control what I want, right? So I'm just going to change the window to show me between this and this Heinz-field unit. That's what I mean by change Heinz-field units. I'm not changing the units itself, it's just a measurement. I am changing the Heinz-field units that I want to be able to detect. Cool. This is a really simple concept, but it's kind of difficult to explain. Once you get the hang of it, you understand why CT Yes, exactly. Exactly. The baseline thing basically means the baseline here is, let's say, water, and water appears to be this color. So now let's say I changed my baseline to 20. So whatever is tissue is 20 Hounsfield units, it will appear of this color instead. It'll be a dark gray shade instead. Okay. Basically, what I mean by baseline is just the middle value of the window. If you understand the window, the baseline is not important. Now, why is this? Sorry, yes, go ahead. Okay. Basically, why is this important? The reason why this is important is because it makes CT a lot more useful. So you know how over here in the X-ray, you couldn't really tell if it was inside the lung field or not. Now you can tell if it's inside the lung field because this is a coronal section. You can tell, okay, so it's in the lung field. And then you can actually go from up to down and look at the different other organs and see if there's problems in any other organ as well, right? So this makes our diagnostic power a lot more. We can diagnose a lot more conditions than this, okay? So again, this is a liver window. So what they're trying to show you, again, this is a cross section of your an axial section of your stomach. So this whole thing is a liver, and what they're trying to show you is that once I convert this to liver window, I can tell apart the minute differences in the liver itself. Okay, that's what they're trying to show you here. If I have the bone window, I will be able to tell the minute differences in the bone. But you see, everything else appears to be gray. I can't tell the details on anything else. Why? Because we don't care about that. So in the bone, I can tell this is air inside the bone. I want to detect a fracture. Probably over here is a fracture, and no, this is a fracture. Okay, that's what they're trying to explain over here. Now, is this clear so far? The only thing we talked about so far, firstly, is X-rays. Then we said that a CT is an expansion of the utilization of an X-ray. Basically, you're taking different projections and you're processing it, and you get better resolution, better image quality, and a lot more diagnostics. The windows is only in CT. This is why it's more useful to us. In the X-ray, the only image you get is this. You can't make the bones appear to be of a different color. You can't, change the, you can't edit the image basically. Okay, this is why CT is more useful. Now let's move on to iodine contrast. Okay, so iodine contrast, what the idea behind this is that iodine contrast, iodine, if you know the periodic table, is a really atomically heavy material, right? It's really dense. The high atomic number makes this very dense as compared to other material in our body, right? If something is very dense as compared to other material in our body, it's going to block a lot more X-rays, right? So if it's going to block a lot more X-rays, it's going to appear a lot brighter as compared to the other objects, right? So we use contrast when we want to look inside blood vessels or other pathologies. Basically, the blood is going to usually appear black. If we want to see if there is any problems in the blood vessels themselves, what we'll do is we'll insert contrast, and that will light up all of the blood vessels, and then we'll be able to see what's going on with the blood vessels. Okay, so over here, the example over here is that this, what is this? This is most probably the pulmonary arteries, okay? And what they're trying to show you over here is that the blood is leaking out of these arteries. Why? Because they injected contrast, and the contrast is present in the blood, right? What they do is they take iodine and they inject into your blood, and it goes all around the body. So now we can see if the contrast is leaking out, we can see, okay, so this is most probably a leakage over here. That's the use of, no, it's not the aorta. This is the ascending aorta, and this is the descending aorta. This is the pulmonary vessel. Okay, not important, post-midterm. So over here, what they're trying to tell you is intravenous contrast aims to maximize the contrast resolution. What they mean by contrast resolution is difference in contrast, or difference between the densities of the tissues, and that helps us see things more clearly. Okay, that's the concept of contrast. Now, again, it's telling you that there is Compton scatter versus photoelectric effect, and there is increase with less kV. Okay, so what they want to tell you is, okay, so the way the photoelectric effect works, I didn't tell you this beforehand, but I'll tell you now. The way photoelectric effect works is that it also is used when we are using the detector, okay? In the detector, the photoelectric effect is actually useful to us. Why? Because let's say an X-ray will come and it will strike the detector and it will change to electrons, right? These electrons will be detected by our scanner or detector, and we'll be able to see the image, okay? So the way you maximize photoelectric effect is if the energy difference required to knock out the electrons of the specific material are equal to the energy, or almost equal to the energy of the initial X-rays. So this iodine contrast, its energy is of a higher level, so it will result in a better, or it will result in a better image quality because it'll be able to generate more photoelectric effect. Okay, that's why they showed this to you here. Basically, the concept is really simple. The more denser the object, the more X-rays it will stop. They're showing you over here that the body tissues, they are not able to attenuate as much X-rays as compared to the iodine because it is of a denser material. Okay, what they're trying to tell you is the photoelectric effect will increase with less kV, because if you decrease the kV, then more iodine will be able to stop more X-rays. So the attenuation will be higher. So the image contrast will be higher. Does that make sense? Oh my God. Okay, I repeat. Right. Okay. A contrast is useful to us. Why is it useful to us? Because it's able to highlight some of the materials which would otherwise not be able to be seen, right? How does this work? The iodine is a lot more dense as compared to the body tissues. How do we know this? This graph shows us this. The body tissue, they're able to attenuate only one whatever unit this is of X-rays, whereas compared to the iodine, it's denser, so it's able to attenuate a lot more. If you attenuate a lot more, what happens? The thing appears to be brighter. So you see how this is really, really bright? If there was no contrast, we would not be able to see it as bright. Okay? That's basically what I'm saying. Cool. I don't get why she would just mention photoelectric effect over there and just confuse everyone. Okay, just to memorize this, because you know that you may get a question. Okay, iodine contrast. How can we increase the photoelectric effect? You increase it by less kV. Cool, memorize, move on. And why? Because the K edge of iodine is closer to that of 33 kAV that we used. Memorize and move on. Don't worry about it. Okay, now this over here is important just because for the sake of MCQs. What they're trying to tell you is radiation dose. So radiation dose in another lecture later on, but for some reason the slide isn't there. So what I'll do is I'll copy the slide over there and explain it over there. Okay, and we're done with this lecture. Do you have any questions for this lecture so far, besides the radiation dose and besides this last slide? Because you don't need the last slide. You just need to know why we do contrast, and you just need to memorize the stuff in red because that's most probably an MCQ. Do you understand the bone window and the different types of windows? That's literally the most important thing in this lecture. And do you also understand that we have, yeah, okay. So the reason somebody asked me if there's multiple X-ray tubes, no, there's just one and we're moving it around the patient, okay? So in the previous slides of the previous batches, when I taught this before, she had this whole history of how X-rays evolved and became better and better and better. And basically these pictures are showing us how they evolved, but for some reason she just stopped here, okay? So don't worry about this too much. Any questions so far? Okay, good. So do you guys want to move on? We're going to do 3 lectures, and then if you want, I can do the contrast and the radiation ones, but honestly, that's most of it is just memorization, so it depends on you guys. I'm fine either way. Okay, cool. So do you want to start with the ultrasound? Okay. So the ultrasound, would you guys give me like 2-3 minutes? I just want to add a couple of pictures to be able to make it easier for you guys to understand. Because ultrasound is really confusing if you don't have the basic idea. I have it in another presentation that I made for the previous PAL. I just need to add a few pictures. So just give me like 2 minutes. These slides, we'll discuss these when we're talking about post-midterm, but there's just a few slides, and I'll tell you what to focus on in the slides as well, because again, this is just extra information. I just want you to have the basic idea of what a gallbladder looks like and stuff, because I'm pretty sure you guys are in second year, so you have no clue what's going on, and the doctor just goes on, and you guys are so lost. Because that's what happened to us. Layout, blank. Wow, perfect. Layout, blank. Okay, that's 2. Okay, just this will be fine. Okay, let me put this as well. Maybe it'll help you guys out. The problem is, in the pre-midterm, the doctor mostly focused on stuff that was mostly about imaging and physics and stuff. But then she came here and then she gave you specific examples. And I can't explain to you these examples without explaining to you the basic structures. Low. Okay, there it is. Layout. Okay, gallbladder is done, and the last one is kidney. Kidney. No, kidney. Perfect. Okay, I just need to delete the extra slides, and we're good. Okay, let's start. Okay, so this lecture is basically about ultrasound, and it has terrible spellings, as you guys can tell. Propagation of ultrasound media, ultrasound probe, image quality. Okay. So what does it say? Okay, so this is basic physics. This is called the wavelength. It's the point of, from one point on a wave to the next point on the same wave, basic physics. This is the frequency. It's the number of waves passing through a point at what particular time, 1 second. It's measured in hertz. It can also be taken as vibrations when we're talking about sounds. And ultrasound is a form of sound wave. So basically the general idea of an ultrasound, to put it really simply, is that we are basically using sounds for imaging. And it's a lot helpful to us for soft tissue structures, okay? We can't use X-rays because all X-rays pass through the soft tissue structures and we're not able to see as much details as we want. And we also use it in specific situations where we cannot allow any radiation to the patient. For example, if someone is pregnant, we cannot expose them to radiation because the developing fetus will be damaged and other stuff, right? That's basically ultrasound. So over here, she says characteristics of waves. She's just talking about basic physics. Velocity is constant for specific waves. We already know this. Again. Okay, so over here, she's trying to tell you that there's different frequencies of sounds, and humans can hear from 20 to 20,000 hertz. This is probably important. You need to memorize this. The numbers you probably need to memorize. She can ask you about the normal range. You can come as an SAQ, what we use for ultrasound. So memorize this. So ultrasound basically means sound which has a higher frequency than the normal hearing frequency. That's why I call it ultrasound. The higher the frequency, there's more properties, right? So the higher the frequency, the higher the energy of the wave, okay? Yeah, so for ultrasound, the wavelength is going to be less than normal, and the frequency is going to be higher than normal, and the energy is going to be higher than normal. Make sense so far? Everything clear? This is the amplitude. Okay, now, why is amplitude important? Because amplitude is related to the decibels, which is related to the energy, okay? So there's two things that contribute to the energy of a wave. One is the frequency, higher frequency, higher wave. Frequency is how small the wavelength is, or how many are passing through a point at one time. I don't know how to explain this in a more simpler way, but amplitude is basically how much this wave is displaced from its baseline, okay? And that correlates to the decibels, and decibels correlate to how loud the sound is, whereas frequency correlates to how high it is or how shrill it is. So you know how females have a higher, generally higher pitch as compared to males because they have a higher frequency of sound, okay? So that's just some basics. Okay, now these are extra slides. The only reason I included this is because talking about X-rays without this does not make sense, okay? So these are extra slides. They aren't present for you guys. If you want, I can share these slides later with you guys. I don't mind. They're not important. Okay, this one is important for you, but the rest are not really important for your exam, but it's important for you to understand, okay? So how does an X-ray machine work? So basically, it's all dependent on the probe. I should have included a picture of an ultrasound probe. Maybe we have it in some of the later slides, but basically you have this mic type of thing that you press on the patient. I'm sure you guys have seen ultrasounds in movies or something. And basically the detector and the source is in the same probe. Okay, that's what's important over here. So the probe contains a special ceramic material called piezoelectric ceramic. And the special quality of this is it produces sound waves when electric current is passed through it. And these sound waves are of a higher frequency, which is basically ultrasound. So they basically produce ultrasound when you pass electricity through them. So this is a special material. Basically, when you pass electricity through them, they vibrate. And when something vibrates, it generates sound. They vibrate at a very high pace, and that generates an ultrasound, okay? So basically over here, what they're trying to tell you is it goes vice versa. So if you pass electricity through this material, it will vibrate and produce a sound. So it will get smaller and wider, and it will produce a sound. But once you yourself increase or decrease the thickness of this material, it will produce an electric current. Okay, this is why we said that the same image is going to produce, can you guys hear me? Oh my God. Okay, you guys can hear me. This same material will serve as both a source and a detector. When it serves as a source, when it is producing X-rays, what's happening? When we are producing X-rays, what's happening? We apply a current through this, and electrical energy changes to sound energy. It vibrates and generates. It generates an ultrasound. Now, this ultrasound wave travels to the human body. It's reflected off of different substances, and it returns to this probe. And then what's happening is that this ultrasound makes this probe vibrate, and then this vibration sets off electricity, and the changes in electricity we detect as an image. Cool so far? So now what's important over here for MCQs is that piezoelectric effect is when a current shifts to an ultrasound. So when do we change electrical activity to sound activity? When we are producing the wave. So they may bring a question in the exam. Okay, so once you are detecting an ultrasound, which of the following mechanisms is being used? Is it piezoelectric effect? Is it indirect piezoelectric effect? So you have to make sure you have this in mind, okay? This is why this is important, cool? So piezoelectric effect, when you are using the source. Indirect, when you are converting a sound wave, when you are converting a sound wave to a current. When you're using the detector, it's the indirect piezo effect. Cool so far? I need a response. I don't know if you understand now. Okay, this is the probe. So basically what's happening over here, yes, I'll repeat the whole thing again. We have this probe, okay? This is our magical wand. What can we do to this wand? It has ceramic material which has piezoelectric qualities, okay? What can we do to produce a sound wave, an ultrasound wave? Basically, we will apply electricity to this, right? We'll connect this to electricity. Now, once we have an electric current passing through this, this will vibrate. Once this vibrates, it generates sound waves, ultrasound waves. These will go to the body, hit the body, reflect off according to the densities of the different tissues, come back at different times, at different energies, whatever. The idea is once the ultrasound comes back, the same object is now being used as a detector. Because these ultrasound, what will happen, these sound waves will come back. These sound waves will cause this piezoelectric material to vibrate. When it vibrates, it changes in thickness. Once it changes in thickness, this change in thickness will cause an electric current to be generated. And this electric current, we have a monitor, we detect it, we change it into an image through processing by the computer. Yes. So there's two different mechanisms that are happening, okay? They're not happening at the same time. They're happening very fast, but at different timings. First, you generate the current, it goes, and then you detect the current once it comes back, okay? But it's the same magic wand that we're using. Cool? what's important for MCQs is what does direct piezo effect mean? What does indirect piezo effect mean? Direct piezo is when you have electrical wave converting to sound wave. And indirect is when you're doing the opposite. Cool? Now I need a response. Okay. So now the way an ultrasound works is that first you have the ultrasound that you produced, and we call this a transducer. Okay, the probe is called the transducer, by the way. So first we send out an ultrasound, then it interacts with different interfaces, and then it sends back an echo, which we detect. Cool? Okay. Now, why did we call this tissue interfaces? Why did we not call this tissue densities? Because now here is where it's different from X-rays. The first difference was X-rays are electromagnetic rays, and this is sound waves. Why do we see this as an image? Because our computer is super cool, and it will convert the sound waves as images to us, which happens after the detector in the background. We don't care about this right now, okay? The second important difference between an X-ray and an ultrasound is that an X-ray is stopped by the different densities of tissues that are present, right? The ultrasound is stopped by the differences in the densities between two tissues. What do I mean by that? If I have a liquid medium and sound is passing through that, and suddenly I have a gaseous medium right after it, the change in the media, the point where the media changes, and the amount of difference between these media changes will determine the amount of reflection of the sound wave. For example, if liquid to liquid is passing through, it won't really reflect that much because the difference in the two different media, the difference in densities of the two media is not that much. So sound wave will continue, okay? If there is a high difference, for example, solid liquid, liquid gas, solid gas, if there is a high difference, there's going to be a large difference in the media interface, and that's going to cause reflection of sound. Cool so far? Yes, I'll repeat. So in the ultrasound, we're not looking at how hard a specific material is, how dense a specific material is. We're looking at what's the difference between media A and media B. Okay, so if we're going between two liquids, it's not that much. So sound wave is not reflected that much, it continues moving onwards. But if we have solid and liquid, there's a large difference in media, right? In the density of media. So a lot of it will be reflected, right? That's what we mean. Whereas in the X-ray, the density of the media itself is what causes the attenuation, okay? Okay, so if it's still unclear, let me know, please, okay? So over here, what they're trying to tell you, this is what I'm getting to right now. So what they're trying to tell you over here is that if there is a large difference between the media, it will appear to be brighter, okay? So over here, this is water, okay? And this is air. So what they're saying is if this probe, if the ultrasound was passing through water and then air came in between, a lot of it was reflected, right? If a lot more is reflected, a lot more is going to be detected over here, and a lot more current is going to be generated, which is going to translate to a brighter image. Whereas if it was able to pass through and only it, so this is liquid and liquid, it's able to pass through because the majority is able to pass through because very little is reflected back. Since very little is reflected back, what we see on the detector is black. Cool? Now what they're trying to tell you over here again is, this is liquid and bone. So in the liquid and bone, what's happening is that there is a large change, and again, a lot more is reflected. So we're seeing it bright. in contrast to this, in X-ray, what happened was we're not concerned about reflections. We don't care about reflections. We care about attenuations. We care about, because the source is over here, the detector is over here. We care about its passing through and how much it's blocking passing through. In ultrasound, what we care about is how much we're reflecting, because the detector and the probe is in the same place. So even if more or less pass through, the amount of image that we detect back doesn't matter. So, make sense? I am not getting into this question. If you are bleeding in the abdomen, what color would you see? Post-midterm. Forget about it for now, okay? What we are trying to explain right now is just how it's different from an X-ray and what's the basis of it working. And this basis of it working will be a lot more clear as we go on, okay? So if you have the general idea that this is based on reflection, now she's going to talk to you about the different properties of sound waves, okay? Okay, so this is basically an image of an ultrasound. What did she mention here? Did she mention anything important? Okay, she does not mention anything important. Forget about this. Basically, what it's trying to tell you, okay, let me explain this image to you so you get a general idea, so you get some perspective. Basically, you know how we said there's a probe? This is the probe, and this is on the patient's stomach, okay? When we have this probe on the patient's stomach, what's the part which is closest to the probe? It's this part. So this is most probably the skin. And then as we're going deeper into the patient, this is probably the subcutaneous fat. And now we have this liquidy material that's over here. And what happened over here, why do we see this as white? The reason why we see this particular object as white is because there was something over here that caused a difference between this liquid and the solid material. And since there is a high difference in the interface, it caused a reflection back to the probe. And since these sound waves were reflected back, this image, this particular substance over here appears to be white. Make sense so far? Okay, cool. That's all I need you to know over here. This is basically telling you about reflection. And the more the difference in quality, the more the reflection. So if I ask you, let's say, why was this white appearance not over here? What's the reason? The reason is the difference between the density of this fat over here and this water over here is not that much. Therefore, only a bit of it is changing once it's changing its media. But over here, the difference is a lot because this is liquid. This is more dense solid. So it's going to appear to be white. Okay. Now, over here, she talks about acoustic impedance. So remember how we said about, okay, so this is different from reflection. Okay. This is a different slide. Now in X-ray, it depends on how much it passes, and in ultrasound, it depends on how much it is reflected. Yes, until now. So far, what I've explained, yes, you're right. Now, acoustic impedance. Now, let me explain to you the problem with ultrasounds first, okay? The problem with ultrasound is my probe is going to be over here. The problem with it is that my probe is going to be over here, right? And I am sending sound waves over here. Now it interacts with one material, some of it is reflected back. The remaining is able to pass through. What happens? There's more material, more stuff gets in the way. And at a certain point, none of the X-rays are able to pass further. Okay, sorry, ultrasound. None of the ultrasound waves are able to pass further, right? Because the more you go, the more there's going to be differences in densities. And after a certain time, energy is being lost. None of it is left, right? So the problem with ultrasound is that there's only so much depth I can go into the body to be able to see the details. This is why once you place an ultrasound on the abdomen of the patient, the most you can see is the stomach, maybe something behind it, but you can't really see all the structures through, right? Because ultrasound simply cannot pass through, right? So what they're saying over here is acoustic impedance basically means the blocking of the ultrasound, preventing it from passing through. And what does this relate to over here? It relates to the number of structures that we can see in the ultrasound. Does not relate to the color, relates to how far deep I can go to clearly make out the details, okay? So acoustic comes from the word sound. Impedance is how much I am blocking it or how much is going through the medium, propagating through the medium, okay? So what it's telling you is that if I have air, very less is going to be blocked. It can go through a long way. The distance traveled is a long way. Whereas in the bone, since the bone is dense, it can't really go that far. So if there's a bone, I can't really see anything behind it. If there's air, I can see a long way behind until there's air. You know, as soon as I reach a bone, I probably can go a less distance and then there's no more ultrasound waves left. So that's basically what's mentioned over here. Okay, now another question to you guys. If for example, I reach a bone and there is a high difference, we talked about the difference in material. So the bone is going to appear, the edge of the bone is going to appear very bright. Everything further down the line is going to appear black. Why is it going to appear black? Because the sound waves simply could not pass through, you know, because all of them were reflected because the difference in media was a lot, okay? Now, this is trying to tell you that different materials have different acoustic impedance. And there's a formula, which I really don't know what it is about, but it has something to do with impedance. Cool. Yes, okay, I know what this stands for. P is basically density. So the higher dense the material, the higher the density of the material, the more the acoustic impedance. Also, the higher the velocity of the sound, the further down the sound can travel. What do we mean by velocity of sound? Speed of sound. What does speed of sound depend on? Speed of sound depends on the energy. What does the energy of the sound depend on? It depends on the frequency. So if I use a sound wave with a very high frequency, it can travel a longer distance, okay? That's what they meant over here, which they did not bother explaining. Now in X-ray is dependent on how much it passes, but it counts how much it was reflected. Yes, you are right. Why is the rest black? Because everything farther away is blocked. Yes, there is no reflection, you're right. So we see black if ultrasound waves lose energy. Yes, that's when we see black. Or when they pass through a similar medium, yes, that's also when you see black, but the reasoning is different. When it's pitch black forward, you know there's no more image forward. But once you see dark, 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 and then bright later on, you know, okay, so it's passing through something, 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 and then it's bright because it hit something as reflected back. No, shadow will come to it, don't worry. More acoustic impedance traveling through the material. No, impedance basically means I impede something, which basically means I am stopping it from propagating, which basically means I am stopping it from traveling a further distance. More impedance, lesser distance traveled, okay? Now, okay, so attenuation, okay, so these are the different properties of sound waves. And we'll see the practical applications in the different pathologies, and I'll briefly go over these because this has more to do with post-midterm, but she just mentioned these just to give you an idea. And you may have an image like this and you know they may be covered and they ask you, okay, what is this? So memorize this specific labeling with the image, okay? It's important. So over here, let's start with the reflection because it's the easiest to understand. If there is an object over here, there's a difference between the media. There's ultrasound going and then there is reflection. So we see this thing over here, which we'll see as brighter image in an actual ultrasound. Absorption basically means as sound is traveling further, it's spreading apart and it's going to be absorbed by the different tissues. So it's going to generally decrease in energy as it's going further apart, right? Attenuation basically means if there is something that's blocking and reflecting a lot of sound wave, very little will be able to pass through further because most of it is reflected, right? I sent one pulse of sound wave over here. It had, let's say, 50 sound waves, 50 sound waves. 30 of them got reflected, so only 20 can continue forward, right? That's what this attenuation means. Diffraction basically means the spreading out. So how it's spreading out like this and like this, okay? That's what diffraction means. So the more it spreads out, right? Once it's reflected back, the less will be reflected back because the spread out one is lost. Because the detector is only so big, right? So these ones, if they reflect back like this, okay, cool, it's lost. Scattering is the same thing. Let's say there's a smaller object, it just scattered all of them about. And basically, the image that I see depends on the number of waves that come back, right? So all of them scattered about, none of them or almost none of them came back, so this appears to be blacker, okay? Refraction is basically the rarefaction. You probably took this in physics before, but let me explain it again. So rarefaction is basically when this happens. Okay, it's not present over here. Basically, when a wave is traveling from one media to a media of a different density, it will reflect back, yes, but the wave that will continue forward will change its direction. It may go a bit like this, okay? So over here, what they're trying to tell you is that, okay, so the ones that were passing through it, they just change direction, okay? And this just these are just properties of or characteristics of sound waves, or any waves in general, like this as well, but over here, we're focusing on sound. Okay, what did you guys write? Didn't we say that attenuation is absorption? Yes, we did. He said absorption or blockage. Yes, yes, I did. Can you repeat what happens in scattering? So scattering, the idea is basically there's a small object over here. It's not basically forming, it's not like an organ this big, right? So if I'm sending ultrasounds and it's like really tiny, it won't be able to detect it because the light is just going to scatter about. So the light that the light or the sound that's reflected back is really, really tiny. So it's just going to cause a lot of ultrasound to be dispersed, which means that the amount of ultrasound that I can detect back, which translates to what I can see on the image, is going to be very little, right? That's basically what it means. So the more scattering you have, the more scattering that you have, the less reflection of the sound wave that you detect back, right? Because only 2 of these are reflecting back and the rest of these are reflecting back and the rest of these are just being scattered about, okay? So attenuation, the actual translation of it is loss of energy, okay? So basically, if you have a high frequency sound, it will have more energy, so there will be less attenuation. Okay, and if it's low frequency, it has low energy, so more attenuation. Okay, exactly. So scattering is mini object comes and it just spreads the light rays apart, and diffraction is because that's how sound waves propagate, right? There's going to be you know how it goes. It's going to be it vibrates, right? So it moves forward, moves back. Once it moves forward, there's a sound wave that propagates through, and then another one diffracts out. In scattering, we aren't able to see the image. Yeah, basically, because the light rays spread out. So the ones that came back were so tiny that even if we can detect them back, it's not going to be a proper structure that we can see. Basically, it's just telling you how we lose sound waves. So reflection, again, if it's reflected back, if the object is like this, it'll be reflected back like this. See, scattered echoes, you only detect some of it because this one, when it's scattering back, we won't be able to detect it because this is our scanner, right? So it depends on I already talked about this interface between different bone and ear. It'll be a lot more, so it'll reflect a lot more. Okay, so an example of reflection over here is over this thing. Remember how I said anything that's reflected will appear to be bright? So there's a lot more reflection of sound wave here, and then less here, and then less here, but it's telling you that there's different structures over here, right? And again, you see this bright line over here. So sound wave came like this, and then it reflected back over here. You see why this is bright? Because sound waves came and then they reflected all of this structure back to you, back to the detector. Okay, so again, refraction, sorry, is just deflection. So you just have a change in the direction if you transfer between the media. It depends on the angle of the incident beam. Okay, cool. The Z angle is different. Okay, cool. Basic physics. Refraction causes a mirror image artifact. So you see this weird thing over here. This is reflection. And you see this whole image appearing over here. This is just an artifact. Why? Because there was refraction. The sound wave just changed direction. The actual object is this right here. This right here is the actual object. But what we're seeing is a mirror image after the reflection, because of the reflection was over here and this was the refraction. So it's just to tell you that why do we see mirror images artifacts? Why do we see these artifacts? Because of the idea of refraction. That's it. Okay. Somebody asked, high frequency, less loss of energy. Nope. High frequency, so more energy to begin with, so better image quality, and the image is able to travel further apart, further distance. Okay, that's how it translates to the attenuation. The probe and the detector is the same thing. So it goes back to the probe, but it's acting as a detector. We call it a transducer, okay? Okay, so this is the parts of a transducer, cool to know. This is the power cable where the electricity comes in. There's an insulator, and this is the important stuff, the piezoelectric crystal. Okay, so now moving on, we have again image quality. 3 types of resolution. So contrast resolution, basically the ability to detect different structures at different shades of gray. Spatial resolution. Spatial resolution is of 2 types. In ultrasound, okay? Spatial as 2 distinct entities, right? So over here, you can have 2 distinct objects either in front of each other or beside each other. When it's beside each other, it's known as the spatial resolution, lateral spatial resolution. And when it's in front of each other, it's called the axial resolution. Okay. So again, that's what the same thing it says, along the axis of the beam, increase with frequency of the transducer. Okay, so how do we increase the axial spatial resolution? We increase it with increased frequency of the transducer. What does that mean? So you see how this object is behind this object if the sound wave is coming through here. So if this sound wave has higher energy, that means that even if some of it is reflected here, many more sound waves will continue passing forward, and they can detect this object behind it. So the more energy, the more distance it's able to travel, and the more, let's say, remaining sound waves keep on traveling. So I'm still able to see an object over here. Whereas if I had a very low energy ultrasound, that meant that it's only able to travel, first of all, to this distance. Then once it traveled to this distance, it reflected most of the objects, most of the ultrasounds back. So only a few remain, so I can't see the details behind it. Okay, so that's why I was stressing on the attenuation concept earlier. Okay, so how do I increase the spatial resolution? The axial spatial resolution, I increase the frequency of the transducer, which basically means I increase the energy of the ultrasound. Cool. Now this formula just okay, so this formula, it makes sense if you think about it. Okay, I'm just going to try to make sense of it for you guys, but just memorize it if it doesn't make sense. So number of we said higher frequency. We said higher, oh my God, where is it? Okay, higher frequency, we said will result in better resolution. Why? Because it will result in more energy. Now, number of cycles per pulse basically means higher frequency. And it also says, yeah, so basically if you increase the frequency, you're going to increase the axial resolution. Just remember that, okay? The lateral resolution is two objects beside each other. So as you can see, it does not depend on the attenuation, okay? Now, let's take the clinical, let's take it into clinical practice. So this is the liver, and just take my word for it. This is the liver over here, this structure like this. I'll explain how it looks like a liver later soon. So this is the liver over here, okay? This structure over here. And this somehow is the heart. I don't even know what they're saying, but I believe them because it's labeled, okay? So this is the heart. So what they're telling you is these two objects are okay, let me try to explain this to you. So basically, this over here is my, forget about this, okay? 4 hertz is this thing, okay? This image right here, forget about it. This is my probe over here, okay? I placed my probe onto my skin, okay? The first thing that came over here was my liver. That's what I'm seeing over here. This is my liver. But once these ultrasound cross my liver, the ones that go further down, they will go all the way to my heart. And they are able to see my heart, okay? So the liver and the probe is over here. So the liver is technically behind my heart, right? What they're trying to say over here is, when I used 6 hertz, which was of a higher frequency, I can see my heart. But when I did the same thing in the exact same place, or maybe not the exact same place because this is like weird, but when I did the same thing with a lower frequency, I cannot see my heart. I really cannot tell what the hell is going on behind this. Do you get the idea? The idea is you can see deeper organs or more detail inside the more frequency you use. So depending on the clinical application, if I want to see the heart, I'm going to use, the heart is pretty deep into the body, right? So if I'm going to look at the heart, I'm going to use a higher energy. If I'm going to just look at the liver, which is right beside my skin, I want to use a high frequency. And it doesn't depend on the frequency, right? No, it depends on the frequency, because the frequency over here is telling us the amount of distance it can travel and still give me good detail, okay? Yes, but the lateral resolution does not depend on this. This is not lateral. We're still talking about axial resolution, okay? This is a clinical image of an axial resolution. 4 megahertz is higher than 6 megahertz? No, no, no. This is 6 megahertz here. This is 4 megahertz here. 4 is lower than 6. The labels are just weird. But why is it not black on the heart? Okay. So the reason why it's not black in the heart over here is because some sound waves are still passing through. Okay, it's not like there's no sound waves passing through. But the problem is these sound waves that are passing through, they're very little, right? So once they're very little, they're reflecting very little back. They're still reflecting. It's not like there's nothing passing through. That's why we see it as gray, and we don't really see the difference in detail that's in this area, okay? No, 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 no. This is 6, okay? This is clear. This is 4. This is unclear. Oh my God. Okay, let's agree this is the clear one. Let's agree this is not that clear. This is 4. This is 6, okay? Yes, it's a bad label slide. High frequency, more attenuation. how about you don't say the word attenuation, and how about you say it's able to withstand more loss of energy? That will clarify your problem. See, the problem is the word attenuation means blockage, right? But over here, what they mean by attenuation is how much attenuation can it withstand to still give me a good image? That's what's confusing you, sir. Yes, so think of it like that, and then it'll make sense to you. Okay? Okay. This is not important for now. It's just telling you that if this material and this material has similar densities, they're going to be appearing as gray. If it has different densities, it's going to appear as a different color, right? Difference in densities, okay? That's the word that's important. Okay, so remember how we said that ultrasounds work with echoes? What we detect is actually echoes. So if anything is dark, that means that we're not getting the echoes back, right? So what we're going to call this is hypoechoic. When we see something that's white, we're actually detecting a lot of echoes. So we call this hyperechoic. Cool so far? This thing, which is of the same density over here, we call it isoechoic. These are just terms that you're going to use later, but since she brought clinical stuff, I have to use them because that's the only way I can describe stuff to you, okay? Now we're going to the more interesting part, which I was waiting for since the past 2 hours. Okay, so this is a normal liver. Can we agree this is a normal liver, right? This liver, you see how it's a triangular shape? This triangular shape is what a normal liver looks like in an ultrasound, okay? If I move the probe a bit like this, I can see the actual triangular thing, okay? If I move it here, I can see something like this, okay? So when we're looking at an ultrasound, basically, what is this? This is my probe, okay? This is my probe. Then over here, I go through. We're going deeper into the body. And this is the end of the liver, okay? How do I know this is the end of the liver? Because there's a lot of reflection. That means that there's a large density change over here. That's one thing. The second thing to notice over here, you see how you can't really tell anything that's behind it? Why? Because there was so much reflection that there's really not a lot of sound waves left that can pass through. If they can't pass through, they can't come back. And if they can't come back, I can't detect them. Cool? When it's white, it means that we have a reflection of ultrasound. So it's hyperechoic. Yes, exactly. So hyperechoic, it's just another fancy doctor-like term, meaning the image appears brighter, okay? That's all hyperechoic means. Yeah. Okay, so over here, I'm talking about a normal liver. Now, what she's bringing to you is a liver hemangioma, okay? What is a hemangioma? Hemangioma is basically a growing inside the liver, which is benign. It's not cancerous, it's not dangerous, and it's usually blood-filled. So basically what she's just trying to show you over here is that this is a normal liver. And if we see this structure over here, which appears to be a bit hypoechoic or a bit brighter than the surrounding region, we know there's something wrong, right? It's different. It's not how it usually appears. So we know that this is a hemangioma, okay? And then over here, okay, one more important thing to tell you here, just to help you to differentiate. Okay, firstly, why am I explaining this stuff to you over here? Because radiology is usually just pattern recognition, okay? If you see this type of image hundreds of times, you'll know that this is a hemangioma, okay? In the exam, if they ask you, they bring you this image, they don't point to the arrow, or they point to the arrow, and they just ask you, what is this? A, B, C, D. And one of the options is hemangioma. You should be able to, answer this correctly, okay? Now, how will you be able to differentiate between the other pathologies? That's what I'm going to try to explain to you over here, okay? This is going to be talked about in a lot more detail in the later post-midterm lectures. Right now, I'm just trying to tell you the differences between these specific pathologies. And the reason for that is if they bring these in the exam and they say it was present in the slide, you can't argue against it, right? So you should be able to know how to tell it apart. Okay. Now, another important thing about your exam, sometimes the images they give you in ExamSoft are terrible. You cannot zoom in. Okay. So if you cannot zoom into an image and there's no other way to tell it apart, you guys can appeal. But if there is a way to tell it apart, the things I'm showing you now, then your appeal will not work. So you should be able to take notes of these points. Yes, so there's more reflection over here. So it appears to be brighter. So this is hyperechoic. My bad, hyperechoic. It appears to be bright, so it's hyperechoic. Okay. Now, this is a hemangioma because it appears to be brighter. Okay. So now I don't want you to focus so much on amount of reflection in this image itself. Okay. What I want you to focus on reflection is over here. This is basically a cyst. Okay. What is a cyst? Cyst is a fluid-filled cavity. Okay. I'm telling you this is a cyst. Now I'm going to explain to you what I mean by this is a cyst and why I know this is a cyst. So if it's a cyst, no, this is not a cyst. Yeah, this is a cyst. Let's call it a cyst, okay? This is a cyst. Let's say it has fluid, but it has some fluid that appears to be gray. Usually fluid appears to be black, okay? Over here, either it's a cyst or it's a mass that appears to be gray. Let's call it like this, okay? Now, the reason why I said this is a cyst is because it appears to be gray. And why do I know that it appears to be, why do I know this is a cyst? It's because you see right behind this, you see all of this, it's brighter, right? All of this is brighter. So ultrasound is passing through, whatever happened here happened, but right behind it, everything started to appear whiter than this surrounding region, right? Now, why is this the case? Because ultrasound is going through here, going through here, and going through here. Why is this the case? The reason is this material over here is less dense, okay? So it's going to block off less sound waves. So let's say there are 100 sound waves here, 100 sound waves here, 100 sound waves here, like in the beginning, okay? Over here, they blocked 20. Over here, they blocked 50. Over here, they blocked 20 again. Okay, because over here, there was a change in material. When there's a change in material, the things get reflected off. So let's say 50 got reflected off, and now only, no. I got this the opposite. Let's say over here, only, yeah, let's say 50 were reflected off over here. Again, this is way too confusing for me, so it's going to be way too confusing for you. Let's start with numbers again, okay? 100, 100, 100, 100 over here, okay? This is a fluid. This is solid, this is solid. Over here, more is going to be blocked off. In the fluid itself, since the fluid is less dense, it's going to allow more to pass through. I'm not talking about reflection right now. I'm just talking about passing through. Once it's passed through this object over here, once it passes through, the amount of ultrasounds over here as compared to this solid only structure are greater. This is why I can see it as a brighter structure, because now it's able to reflect off more material. So what can I see in the ultrasound? What am I looking at the ultrasound? I see some sort of discoloration over here. And then I see that the image behind it, posterior to it, is enhanced. There's posterior acoustic enhancement. That tells me that this structure over here was less dense. And since this object over here was less dense, it's most probably either a less dense abnormal tissue or it is fluid. Why do I know this? Because of this posterior acoustic enhancement. Does that make sense? Yes, the density over here is important because now we're comparing the density of this object as compared to the density of this object. Since the density is less, more sound waves are able to pass through. Since more sound waves are able to pass through, more are able to be reflected back, and this is why this appears to be brighter as compared to this. The higher density means that, let me put it this way. 100 sound waves are traveling over here. Okay, 50 are traveling over here. 80 are traveling over here. 50 are traveling over here. I said 80 over here. Okay. Then over here, there's 30. Here, there's 40. Here, there's 30 again. So there's more sound waves traveling. There is, again, more sound waves traveling. Again, more sound waves traveling. What's my logic for knowing that there were more sound waves here? You know, because the density does not correlate with the reflection. Reflection correlates with the difference in density material. Okay, reflection correlated with this edge over here. Okay, but why do I know that there is less dense material here? Because even though they were reflected, a lot more sound waves were still able to continue passing through because they were not stopped by a dense material. Since they weren't stopped, what happened was over here, there was again a change in interface. There was reflection, reflection, reflection here, and I was able to see white stuff. Over here, there is, compared to this, it's the same tissue, right? This is the same tissue as this. But the only reason why this appears to be brighter than this patch over here is because less were stopped over here. Does that make sense to you? A less dense object was over here. Again, what I'm trying to say is this is a liver. So in a liver, there's a circular lesion over here. The rest is still liver. So ideally, I should see the same color throughout, the same color throughout, the same color throughout. The reason why I'm seeing this enhanced lesion just over here is because there is more sound waves that were able to pass through because less were stopped by the higher density. Does that make sense? Yes, we did have reflection, but keep in mind there's a lot of sound waves that are traveling through. So the reflection, what did that do? It made the image brighter. But what is this doing? The less attenuation or the less stopping, what is that doing? It's allowing me to see the rest of this as relatively brighter because there's relatively more number of sound waves passing through. Yes, it's full of blood or it's full of fluid, right? Since it's full of fluid, what does that mean? It's less dense as compared to its surrounding structure. If it's less dense, I agree there's a density change. I agree with that point. The density change, I see it over here as this density point change. But what I'm trying to tell you is after the density change happened, khalas, that happened, why am I seeing brighter image over here? I'm seeing a brighter image over here because less were stopped when they were traveling throughout as compared to this. So this appears to be darker, this appears to be brighter. Blood is less dense as compared to the surrounding region. Blood is liquid. Solids are more dense than liquids. See, the density, the reason why I'm saying density does not relate with reflection is because there's two things that we can see in an ultrasound. The one thing that we see is this sharp image change over here. That's related to the reflection, okay? But this overall increase in the amount of light that I can see is because of less density. Let me try to give you an example with light. So let's say, yeah, let's put it this way. If I have an object, the sun is coming, and then we have an object, and then some light can pass through the object, the shadow will appear to be less dark. Whereas if there is something very bright, the shadow will appear very dark. Why is it appearing very dark? Because it blocked all the light which was passing after it, you know? So none of the light rays can actually pass after it, so it appears to be really bright. It's the exact same thing over here. Since light rays can still go beyond the object, the relative terms, in relative terms, this appears to be brighter than this tissue. That's all I'm saying. Clear? Why is the hemangioma hyperechoic if blood is also a fluid? See, hyperechoic, what I mean by hyperechoic is that it appears to be, why is hemangioma hyperechoic if blood is also a fluid? Because if blood is a fluid, it's less, no, it's not a hyperechoic because it's also a fluid. How do I explain this to you without confusing the rest of you? Think of it as it's hyperechoic because it is reflecting, okay, over here it's hyperechoic because it's reflecting more sound waves. Think of it like this. The hyperechoicness depends on this. This enhancement is, what I mean by enhancement is I'm comparing this portion over here to this portion over here. Okay, they're not two different tissues. Over here, this was a different tissue. Okay, that's why it appeared to be. First of all, let me explain something to you. When we say hyper and hypoechoic, I'm just talking about it being bright or being dark. Okay, it does not depend on the amount of reflection. Okay, it's just I'm saying this is white, so it's hyperechoic. That's one thing. The second thing I'm trying to explain to you is that this shift over here that I'm seeing, this crescent shape, is because of the density change, because there is reflection, because we can detect it. But what I'm trying to explain to you is there's no density change between this and this. It's the exact same tissue that's going all around. But it appears to be brighter because more sound waves were blocked when they were passing through this side than they were passing through this side because this was less dark. Okay? The color of this itself, it's not related to its density. It is related to its density, but it's more related to the densities of the different components of this tissue structure inside this. Does that clarify this? It's not one solid object for you. The reason why I'm not going into more details is because let's say this was a cancerous lesion. You would not see this as is relatively hypo and then hyperechoic. You won't see it like this. You would see it like this, and then you would see bright speckles in between. Why? Because there's calcification in between, which means that a lot of reflections happen. Okay, that's why like I'm not going into a lot more details, so it's not clarifying so much. Let's go further, and I think you'll get a lot more detail. So let's say over here, this is a normal gallbladder, okay? Okay, so this is a normal gallbladder, okay? Now, what is a gallbladder? It's a small, tiny, fluid-filled structure near to the liver, okay? It's filled with fluid. It's filled completely with fluid. There's nothing else over there, okay? So it's going to appear completely black. Why is it going to appear completely black? Because there's no reflection going on. Sound is just traveling through. So the point where it's going to get reflected is going to be its first edge and the other edge. This is why the gallbladder, I'm able to see it in a pear shape over here, okay? So once the sound is traveling through, there's no reflection at this point, no reflection at this point, no reflection at this point, so all of it appears black, right? If it appears to be gray, that means that there's some hazy deflection that's still going back, okay? So over here, I just want you to understand that a gallbladder is going to look like a hollow substance over here, a fluid-filled substance over here. The second important thing is that when I'm looking behind a gallbladder, I will also see this posterior enhancement. Everything behind it will appear to be a bit brighter than everything as compared to the surrounding regions. Why? Again, because there was less density over here, so more sound waves kept on passing through. Yes, there was reflection, but the total amount of resultant sound waves are still going to be higher as compared to this tissue here. Over here, when I say posterior enhancement, I'm just comparing this to this. Does that make more sense? Yes, because it's less dense, but it's less dense. That's not the reason why it appears black. It's less dense, so this posterior stuff appears to be brighter. Okay, the reason it appears to be black is because it's allowing all of the waves to pass through because it's less dense. Okay. The reason for this whole black stuff is because it's less dense, so there's less reflection. Okay. Okay, now moving on to your second question over here. So this is a gallstone which has this is a gallbladder which has a gallstone. Okay. Now this will clarify a lot of stuff for you guys. The stuff that you're not understanding, this is going to help you out a lot. So let's start. This is the gallbladder, normal gallbladder, and then you see this white stuff here, this white crescent. What is the white crescent? The white crescent is the first edge of the stone, right? There was a contrast change. There was liquid to solid. Liquid to solid reflected a lot of it. So it appeared to be very bright. Agreed so far? Okay, so now let's move on. Since it reflected a lot, it was very, very bright. The second problem is this is very dense. If it's very dense, it's stopping most of them from passing through. It's absorbing most of the light rays or the sound waves. When it's absorbing most of the sound waves, literally nothing else can pass through. If nothing else is passing through, everything beside it, behind it is going to appear as a black structure or a shadow. Somebody asked me about acoustic shadow. This over here is an acoustic shadow. So to put it very, very simply for you guys, when do I see an acoustic shadow? Or basically, when do I see everything that's black or dark behind something? Whenever there is something that's very dense, something like a solid, something like a stone, something like calcification. Okay, when do I see posterior enhancement? When do I see posterior enhancement over here? When there is something which is less dense. Cool. Can you relate this to the exact opposite over here now? Perfect. See, it's really simple once you get the hang of it once. Once it clicks, khalas, you get it for life. Okay, so now if an image comes to you like this, I can't tell anything about it. Can I at least tell that there is posterior enhancement? If there's posterior enhancement, it's most probably less dense. If it's less dense, it's hemangioma. Over here, if the picture is not clear, but I see a shadow, can I at least say, okay, there's a shadow, so there's definitely a stone over here, because it's blocking all the stuff. So in an ultrasound image in the exam, if you see a shadow, you'll be able to tell if it is a stone or not. This is how you tell it apart. Over here, it doesn't look like a stone, right? Because it doesn't appear like one stone appears to be multiple stones or like a very large stone, right? Something that's large, that's blocking everything that's between. But we know it's something that's really dense. That's all I want you to know over here. Okay, so that's basically gallbladder done. Now let's move on to kidney. Now the thing is, perfect. Yes, that's it. Posterior enhancement is a cyst, shadow is a stone. Why? I explained it to you. Now, over here, this is a kidney, right? This is a kidney. Now we know that kidney has a cortex and a medulla. Cortex and medulla have different densities. I don't care which one is more dense, which one is less dense. What I care about is that they will appear as different echogenicities over here, right? So this is basically a kidney, and what we're doing is we're looking at the kidney through a liver. So do you recognize the liver now? It's this triangular thing, and this is the kidney shape that's over here. Okay. Now, over here, again, same concept. This is the normal kidney. Okay. Now, what I'm looking at over here is a terrible image, horrible image, but what I'm looking at over here is this one speck of brightness, which is basically the stone part, and then there's posterior enhancement. Cool? That's all I want you to know over here. How do I know this is renal stone? Because it was supposed to look like this. Okay. How do I know in real life? In real life, I know what I'm pointing at, right? My probe, I know what I'm pointing at. In the image, you have to kind of think, okay, so this is a liver behind the gallbladder. Gallbladder comes first. Over here, the liver comes first, and this is behind, the kidney is behind the liver, so this is most probably a kidney. You have to use whatever you can to differentiate them, okay? It's all on you. This is a shadow. Did I say posterior enhancement? I mean shadow. Yes, if I said shadow, if I said enhancement, I'm really sorry. I'm in shadow here because there is a stone. Okay. Now over here, this is an ultrasound. This is a CT. Forget about the CT for now. Let's look at the ultrasound. Over here, what's happening is that there is fluid collection in the kidney. So we have a kidney. There was a stone somewhere in the ureter. Okay. Now kidney kept on producing more water, but there was a stone somewhere down here. There's no way I can see a ureter with an ultrasound. Agreed, agreed. I can only see a stone inside the kidney itself. Once there's a stone in the ureter, there's no way I can see it because I can't see the ureter because it's too far deep inside. Cool. Now, what I can see if there is a stone in the ureter is that there's going to be a stone, so there's going to be obstruction to flow. Okay. Now there's going to be obstruction to flow over here. This kidney is going to keep on producing water, urine is being produced. It's going to keep on expanding, and it'll lead to a condition known as hydronephrosis. How do I know hydronephrosis is an obstruction downstream? Because all of this hypoechoic area. How do I know it's hypoechoic? Because it is less dense. Why am I saying it's less dense? Because it's allowing all the ultrasound to pass through. So the reflection I see is over here and over here. There's no reflection over here. Cool. So this whole hypoechoic area is an obstruction and a hydronephrosis, which basically means obstruction downstream, as opposed to this, which is a stone in the kidney itself. Cool. Okay. Now, what they did was they saw this condition and they basically looked at it from an coronal section of a CT, and they found the same exact thing. They found this is a normal kidney, exactly normal. It's like this, it's going down. This is the ureter I can see over here. Over here, I can see the kidney, which has dilated because of the back pressure. Yeah, hypoechoic is the kidney area. Why is it hypoechoic? Because it's black. Why it is going to be hyperechoic? Okay, so now there is a cyst. So the exact same logic that was before. Cyst is fluid filled. That's why there's no blockage in between. But as soon as there's a difference in contrast material in the densities, you see white interface. Now, once this white interface is gone, okay, sure, everything else appears to be brighter. Why is it brighter? Because there is posterior enhancement, because this was able to only stop few ultrasounds. Okay. Over here, we can say that this is a solid mass. How can we say this is a solid mass? Number one, because it's not hypoechoic, it's hyper or isoechoic, whatever, I don't care. It's not black, right? It's brighter than the other stuff. The second thing is that there is no either shadow nor enhancement. So this is a mass, but this is a renal mass. It's not a stone because there is no shadow. If it was a shadow, I would call it a stone. If it was a cyst, if it was posterior enhancement, I would call it a cyst. But since it's somewhere in between, and so this is relatively normal, then this is a normal solid renal mass. Could be a tumor, could be benign lesion, I don't care. With renal mass, there's no shadow and there's no posterior enhancement. So that's it. If there's a shadow, I would think of a stone. There's posterior enhancement, I would think of a cyst. So this is most probably a solid structure. It's not as hard as the calcification in the stones. That's why there's no shadow, but it's not as soft or as less dense as fluid, right? That's why it's somewhere in between. See, it's just a renal mass. Honestly, there's no way I can tell if this renal mass is actually hemangioma or something else unless we do a biopsy and unless we do other scans. Right now, I can only tell this is a solid mass. Over here, the example that they were trying to bring over here in the hemangioma and confusing us was that they just wanted to show an example of a benign lesion. Okay, and over here, so okay, now let me ask you a question. Do you notice any difference between this hemangioma? These are two different images, by the way. Don't think of it as the same image. It could be a different hemangioma or something, okay? What's the difference between this and this? Over here, there is posterior enhancement. Over here, there is posterior enhancement. Over here, there is completely dark. Over here, there's still some sort of tissue over here, right? So this is why some sort of tissue is probably because of all the blood vessels inside, right? This is not just filled with blood. There's a lot of blood vessels which are abnormally shaped out of this. This is why this is the hemangioma. Okay, this thing over here, it could be that this is overall more dense as compared to the surrounding region. This is why it's reflecting more and more overall. Okay, so these are two different things. Now, what else? Okay, again, same concept, thyroid, this is normal thyroid. Okay, this is normal thyroid, but I don't know why this is blocking it. There's something that's blocking it, definitely. I don't know if this is normal thyroid or not. This is not my slide, okay? But over here, definitely. Okay, yeah, this is a normal thyroid. Apparently it does stop it. Why do I know this? Because she labeled this as T, and now I know this is the normal thyroid. So what we're looking at is the thyroid and the surrounding structures. In the surrounding structures, I see this is a cyst. Why is this a cyst? Because there is posterior enhancement. This is a thyroid, it's blocking everything behind it. Why is this a nodule? Because there's still enhancement behind this. Again, why is this a nodule itself? It's not a cyst, because the nodule is gray and the cyst is black. Okay, the solid inside that is still reflecting stuff back. So usually if we see a cyst, we call it benign. We don't have to worry about it. If we see a thyroid nodule, could be cancerous, could be not, we have to do other tests. Cool? Apparently, this is the normal thyroid, and apparently, actually, yes, this is the normal thyroid. This is the normal thyroid, and you can't see anything behind it because it's blocking a lot of stuff. Okay? The thyroid itself is not black. Everything behind it is black because it's actually very dense. Now, I have a question for you. I'm saying this is actually very dense, right? But why do I not see it as very bright if it's very dense? Because the difference between this and this is not that much. Okay? Because this is also some sort of solid. This is also some sort of solid. But I know this is very, so the difference between them is not that much. So the reflection is not that much. But I know that this is very dense itself. Dense as in compact, dense as in hard itself, because it's blocking so many sound waves from passing through. Does that make it clear again? Nodule is just a mass. Yes, it is, but it depends on how hard the mass is, right? This is why the stone is able to block everything, because it's a stone. A stone is literally dense. It's not dense as compared to radiology stuff, dense, that too, but like it's literally hard, you know, as compared to a liver that's just not normal, you know, that's why. Okay, normal adrenal glands. I have no idea what this is. Okay, so they labeled it for you. So this is the, okay, now I figured this out. This is the liver. This is the kidney behind it. How do I tell this is a kidney? The K. And also because there's like, you know, it's behind the liver and it's behind a triangular thing and it's like different structure, whatever. What they're focusing over here is over this. I don't know why she would ever bring this, but apparently she may be able to ask you what this thing that looks like a Y is, and it's apparently a adrenal gland. Okay, it's useful in children. Take her word for it. Cool. So this was ultrasound. Now I have a question. How tired are you guys? Do you still want to continue with other two lectures? For thyroid, why is it not hyperechoic if it is a very dense? Okay, let me explain this to you again. It's a good point. Okay, so what did we say about reflection? Reflection is about the differences in densities. Agreed? Now, what is the reflection difference in densities? The more the difference in densities, the more the reflection. Okay, but it has nothing to do with the remaining sound waves that are passing through. That depends on the actual density of the material. Okay, not the density difference. What happens in stone is that in a gallbladder, you have this gallbladder fluid, and then there's a stone. So there's a change from water to a solid stone. Solid stone has calcium, calcifications. Calcifications make it very, very dense. Okay, so the crescent itself appears to be very, very bright. Okay. By this, I know that there is a huge difference in the densities between the solid and the liquid. Okay. Then we agreed that this is very, very hard. So what will happen? How do I know it's hard? Everything after this is going to be black. Okay. Now I'm telling you the same thing over here. I'm telling you this is very, very hard. How do I know this? Because this is a thyroid, and everything behind it is hard. That is black. This is what I know. This is a very dense material itself. Now the reflection, the brightness of the reflection depends on the difference between the structure over here and the structure over here. In case of a gallstone, the structure above this was liquid. Liquid is very less dense. It's not dense at all compared to a solid. Over here, it's another solid, which is a bit less dense in comparative terms with this. Relatively, it is less dense than this. So it's less bright over here. Okay, does that clarify this? It's less, this initial brightness is less. Why? Because this is most probably, what is this? This is most probably the fascia around the thyroid. The fascia is made up of like subcutaneous fat, connective tissue, and stuff like this. Okay, it's not the trachea, because trachea, if you look at the normal anatomy, trachea is behind, right? The thyroid surrounds the trachea. No, it's not. It's not air, because if it was the trachea, you would actually see some other object over here. Like the trachea is technically behind it, but there's no way I can tell where the trachea starts, and then maybe this is the trachea. You know, I never know because I can't see anything behind it. Probably this is the trachea because there's air over here. Like this is black over here as well. You know, the thyroid. What I'm trying to say is the thyroid is here. Okay, so everything over here is jet black. Sure, it stopped everything. Maybe this thing over here black and this thing over here is the trachea. I don't know. I can't comment. Okay. Over here, I can't really tell because I can't see anything behind it. Maximum attenuation at this point. Cool. So now we're done with this lecture as well. Do you understand the basic? The questions in the exam are going to be very, very basic, or they're just going to be gallstone, cyst, hemangioma, something like this. Yes, sorry, I forgot. Can you repeat the gallbladder stone? Let me show you the difference between the gallbladder stone and this. You know what? Let's make it easier for you. Let's take gallbladder stone, copy. Let's take thyroid, normal thyroid. Let's place it here, and then now look at the difference. So a thyroid stone, basically what happened was it's really, really dense. There's a liquid behind this. The difference over here is very, very large. So the difference in density causes this crescent shape. Now the crescent shape is done, khalas, we move on. What happened further down is everything is black. Why is it black? Because the other part of the stone, the remaining part of the stone, was so dense, was so solid, that it blocked all the, or compact, that it blocked all the sound waves from passing through further. So everything is black. I'm saying the exact same thing over here. The structure itself is very, very, very dense. What's my rationale for this? Not the color of the actual object, not the color of the actual object. I don't care about that. I care about the shadow behind it. That's how I know this is very, very dense. How do I know that this is very, very dense compared to the surrounding structure? Because of this really, really bright image over here, as compared to this gray image over here, which means that this relative to this is not that different. Cool. Hemangioma slide. Yes, hemangioma slide. What's your question? You can unmute and ask if you want. Both pictures are hemangioma. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. This is definitely a hemangioma. This one, I'm not sure. It could be a tumor, it could be anything else. I don't know what she means over here. Could be hemangiomas of different densities. Maybe if someone becomes an ultrasound expert, they're able to figure out grades. I really don't know. This is not a cyst. This is a cyst because it's jet black. This is a hemangioma because you can still see gray stuff, right? So you can still say gray stuff tells you that it's still going to be some solid parts. And what are the most probable solid parts inside this? They are blood vessels. Why does it appear to be? Yeah, they're blood vessels, right? So it's still less dense because the blood vessels have blood in them, right? But you don't see a jet black thing over here because this is just fluid. In the gallbladder slide, can you please explain in density, difference in density between two tissues? Yeah, sure. So basically, gallbladder is filled with water, okay? The gallbladder is filled with water, okay? Water is going to be less dense, agreed? Stone in comparison is very, very, very compact, okay? Okay, I'm going to answer the other question first because I don't want that person to be confused. The term hyperechoic, anything I see bright is hyperechoic to me. I don't care about densities with hyperechoic, hypoechoic, okay? I don't care about densities. I don't care about difference in densities because every time I say hyperechoic, I'm not going to be thinking about that. What I'm going to be thinking about is it white or not, okay? The reason why we use hyperechoic is just to explain to people where I'm looking at, okay? That's number one. So now let's go back to this gallbladder over here. This is the gallbladder. We know it's a gallbladder. Why? Because the liver is underneath it and it appears to be a pear-shaped object. Cool? Okay. Gallbladder is filled with fluid. Why does the fluid appear to be black? Because it is less dense, number one. But the more important thing is that if it's less dense, it's allowing all these sound waves to pass through. If it's allowing all the sound waves to pass through, none of the sound waves are being reflected back here, 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 here. See, the sound waves are passing through this object as well. But since it is relatively more dense, there is still going to be gray color as opposed to jet black. Cool? Now, this is very, very dense, right? It's a rock. It's a rock inside a body. A rock inside a body is going to block off all of the stuff that's passing through it. For example, if I have a tissue and I have a rock, what allows light to pass through it? The tissue, right? So even if I look behind the tissue, I can still see some structure to the back, right? Whereas if I put a rock and I try to look through it, there's no way I'm going to see anything behind it. Why? Because no light waves are passing behind it. Same idea over here. Everything behind it, there's no way I can see it because it's a rock. Whereas over here, it's a tissue, whatever, ultrasound can pass through it. So I can still make sense of the objects behind this. That's what I mean by a shadow. Posterior enhancement is the exact opposite. What's a posterior enhancement? Basically, a posterior enhancement, I'm looking at over here. Let's say this is posterior enhancement. So this is either a cyst or a gallbladder. Either way, it has fluid in it. Cool? Now, if it has fluid in it, yes, there was a density change when it changed from a liver to a gallbladder. Yes, it appeared to be bright. Yes, this appears to be very black because it's very light or less dense. So all of the sound is passing through, none of it is being reflected. Yes, there's a density change over here, so I can see another crescent-like thing over here. I can see the demarcations really clearly. But what I'm focusing on in posterior enhancement is this region compared to this region. This region appears to be less bright as compared to this region because more of the sound waves are present at this point, at this point, at this point, because they weren't constantly absorbed by the tissue, solid tissue here, solid tissue here, solid tissue here. Cool? So it's the exact opposite if you think about it. This did not let any of the objects pass, any of the light pass through, so I couldn't see anything. This allowed more light to pass through. So this appears to be brighter than this one. Cool? this appears to be brighter as compared to this. I'm comparing it to the same tissue that was going through. When I'm comparing this shadow, I'm comparing it to this place and this place beside it. Because that's what I care about, right? Because sound was traveling here, 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 here. Sound was traveling here, 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 and here, 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 right? The only difference is something here. That means that while sound was traveling here, something happened that made it go black over here. When it's dark here, okay, sure. When it's dark here and then bright onwards, something happened that allowed more light to pass through or more sounds to pass through. And now I see the whole thing as brighter. And the whole thing that I see as brighter is because less was absorbed here. Cool? Okay. Does anyone have any more questions related to any of the three topics that we talked about? If you have, please ask. Now, do you guys want me to really quickly skim through the other stuff? Do you guys still have the patience and the stamina? No, if you want, I'm perfectly fine either way. Can you quickly repeat the photoelectric effect? Okay. So now I'm going to repeat the photoelectric effect. I don't want you to be confused between any of the other stuff, okay? This is just me going to explain to you the photoelectric effect and then how it relates to other to X-rays. Radiology touch. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to describe to you the principle of the photoelectric effect, which basically states, I didn't save the slides. Oops. Oh, this is a different presentation. Anyway, the photoelectric effect. Yeah, this is a different presentation. But it should not, doesn't have photoelectric effect. Why does it not have photoelectric effect? This is a different one. Sorry. This is yours. Okay. So the photoelectric effect is just for your understanding over here, okay? Now, when we were talking about these four things over here, these four things were interactions once the X-ray has passed through the passed through the source, obviously, because it started from the source, passed through the filter. Now it's passing through the human being. And we are basically trying to understand what are the factors that can affect image quality, that we have to adjust image quality, that we have to keep in mind, that will reduce image quality if it's not kept in mind. Cool? So these are the different factors. So these are the four different factors. Now, out of these, the Compton scatter effect we talked about. The photoelectric effect basically states okay, now I'm going to explain to you the whole photoelectric effect, okay? Photoelectric effect basically states that if I have an X-ray over here and I have an electron in the inner shell, not the outermost, one of the inner shells, the energy of this X-ray is equal to the binding energy of this electron. If they're equal, what's going to happen is this electron is going to be ejected out. Now, this electron, when it's ejected out, X-ray or light energy was fully converted to energy inside this accelerating electron. Cool so far, okay? This is the first thing that I want you to understand. Now, the second step of this, and I didn't go into the detail last time, but the second step of this is once there is a displacement, remember characteristic radiation? Same concept. There's going to be unstable, and the body itself will try to stabilize it. The way it stabilizes it is that a higher energy electron is going to move into the lower field. When it moves into the lower field, the energy emitted over here is going to produce another X-ray. This X-ray is not the same as the previous one because the energy of this X-ray depended on the source. The energy of this X-ray depends on the energy difference between these two, right? So this is going to interfere with the image. That's when we are talking about it interfering with the human being. Now, the photoelectric effect also comes into play when we are talking about the detection of the image. Why? Because it passed through the human being, sure it did. Then now it's going to be detected onto our detector. The way it is actually detected onto a detector is the same exact concept. There's going to be detectors of various energies spread throughout the grid. And what's going to happen is there's going to be these X-rays, the remaining X-rays which fall onto this material. The remaining X-rays will fall onto this material and convert this into electrons. So now when they convert this into electrons, these electrons will all have different energies because they pass through different attenuations through the different tissues of the body. And these different energies of electrons will be detected as dark or bright on the actual X-ray film, because it's not an actual X-ray film anymore, it is an electrical grid. Does that explain to you the whole photoelectric effect? Okay. I don't want you guys to be confused between us inside the human being, inside the detector over here in this whole lecture. There is no detector except, mentioned over here. This is why I completely skipped the second part, okay? Because a lot of you are just here to understand the slides and move on, right? But if you guys want to understand, I am more than happy to explain. Okay, so let's talk about this one first because it's 15 slides. So radiation protection. This is just memorization, pure memorization. Okay, so they tell you about radiation is harmful to you. That's why it must be controlled. This is a fancy image of the same thing. This is probably the only important thing over here, the only important thing for me to explain over here. So now again, this is exposure to human beings. Now what we're talking about is radiation exposure to human beings while they are going through X-rays, while they're going through CT scans. The thing is, X-rays are generally harmful to human beings. And the reason why they're harmful is that they cause cancer, okay? They harm the cells in the body. The way they harm cells in the body is of two different types. They can either harm the cells of the body through a stochastic effect or a deterministic, by which human cells are damaged. Can you guys still hear me? Because it tells me my internet connection is unstable. Basically, what they want you to know. Okay, let me know when it gets better. Okay. Basically, what they want you to know is that the human body can be damaged in two separate ways. One of them is deterministic, one of them is stochastic, okay? You just need to know these two names, first of all. The second thing you need to know is the way the deterministic, wait, let me check. Yes, the way the deterministic works is that, okay, let's talk about deterministic first. So what it tells you is that it is dose dependent and there is a threshold. Okay, what does that mean? Let's go back. Dose dependent and then there is a threshold. This is the dose dependence. This is deterministic. Deterministic is over here. Deterministic basically means that it's dose dependent. What does that mean? Basically, it means, let's say I'm a patient who has to go to the hospital for serial X-ray follow-ups every 3 months, okay? So in 1 year, I will have multiple X-rays, right? The total dose that I will be exposed to, the cumulative dose I will be exposed to over a long period of time will accumulate in the body, right? Every time there is damage to the X-ray, I do an X-ray scan, it damages some of the body cells, right? So let's say I go 10 times. 10 times I go, nothing happened. The 11th time I go, this deterministic effects start to appear. What happened the 11th time I went, or any specific threshold, before that there was no damage. As soon as the accumulative damage compiled, now the DNA has started to damage. Why and how has it started to damage? It has started to break. So there is a threshold, there is a set amount that varies depending on the amount of radiation, depending on the type of body, depending on how fat the person is, depending on how frequently the person is body, whatever. There's a lot, depending on the tissue that's exposed to. There is a lot of problems. We don't, there's a lot of variables. We don't care about the variables. The idea is after a set amount of cumulative dose, DNA damage will start to appear. Once it starts to appear, then it will increase exponentially the more radiation dose increases. Cool so far? Okay, now let's talk about stochastic effect. This basically means this basically means that every time I go, there's going to be some sort of damage. Okay, and this some sort of damage is non-specific DNA damage. Okay, so basically every time I'm going to the hospital, the radiation dose is accumulating, right? Because I get exposed every time. So every time I get exposed, I'm going to get more DNA damage. It's not DNA break, it's DNA damage. So basically the idea of deterministic is, for some time, you don't get a damage. After a set amount of time, you start getting damage. And once you start getting damage, it's really bad. It goes exponentially. That's what it's telling you. Stochastic tells you that there is no threshold. Every time I'm going, there is damage. Yeah, every time I'm going, there is damage, but the damage is linear. It's not like I go 10,000 times, it's suddenly like 1,000,000 times more. You get me? It's linearly increasing. That's what they're trying to tell you over here. Like, it's just damage that happens every time I go to the X-ray machine. The other one is trying to tell me for some time it won't happen until there's a set amount of point. Once it happens, it's really bad. It's dose dependent. Like, then every time it's going to depend on the accumulative dose. You know, every time there's increased dose, it's going to increase exponentially. Over here, it's increasing, but it's increasing very, very slowly. Every time I go. The first time I went, it was this amount of damage. Okay. Now every time I'm going, it's this and additional this. Or let's say it's starting from here. I'm not sure, but either way, the damage is linear. Cool. This graph itself is not, this is an extra graph that I just put in because I couldn't explain all of this to you with just this, okay? So I put in the graph myself. Now, again, I said this is pure memorization. ELARA is something that is bound to show up. You know, it's going to be a question, they're going to ask you, what does ELARA stand for? It stands for as low as reasonably achievable. What are the principles of ELARA? Know these principles. The more time I'm exposed to the X-rays, obviously it's going to get worse because it's going to accumulate. The more distance there is between me and the X-ray machine, obviously there's going to be less exposure to radiation. The more shielding there is. So basically what technologists do, they're literally exposed to X-rays on a daily basis, right? So what they do is, once they're going to start the X-ray machine, either they go to a whole different room, and that's basically a wall that acts as a shield between them and the other person, or they wear a lead plate because they don't want to get damaged, right? So that's basically shielding. So basically, it's, if you stop the radiation by something, it's going to be reduced. If you increase the distance, obviously it's going to be reduced because less X-rays are getting to you. And the time is, the more you're exposed to it, the more radiation you get, okay? It's really simple, it makes complete sense if you just think about it. Just memorize these wider principles, justification, optima. I think they talked about it later. This is not does, this is dose, by the way. The less time spent near a radiation source, the less radiation absorbed. Okay, makes sense. This is important for technologists, radiologists. Okay, good. Inverse square law states that the further away you are, the less exposure. Okay, cool, makes sense. It's inversely related. That means that it's going down in a quadratic graph if you guys are interested in math. Okay, shielding, again, the type of material that you can use. Generally, they use lead. And the reason they use lead is because it has a high mass number, so it's going to block more X-rays. Cool. Yeah, that's what it says. This is telling you that, you know, the harder the object, copper is going to block a lot more than, for example, air. And then it's also telling you that the more energy the X-rays have, the less I can block. Makes sense, right? It's going to penetrate more. Justification, blah, 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 same thing. Optimization. So optimization basically means you weigh the pros and the cons and you see what is acceptable as the radiation dose is as much as reasonable possible. The idea is we want to use the minimum amount of dose to be able to make our diagnosis, to be able to help out the patient. But we do not exceed this, because the more we exceed, the more additional damage we're doing. So we want to do the minimal damage. That's why we're going to use the minimal as low as reasonably possible. Reasonably possible, because if it's too low and it's not helping us out, what's the point? Why are we doing this anyway? Okay. Yeah, that's about it. Dose limits. Again, there's an International Commission of Radiation Protection, Radiology Protection, which have these set rules, and they have all of these standards that are, you know, applied on two groups. One is for the public and the patient, the general public. One is the exposed workers, like radiologists, and these dose limits do not apply to patients, because patients, they have to go multiple times, so they have different parameters. It's basically telling you they have different guidelines for stuff. Okay. These last two slides, I honestly don't know why she brought it. I think the formulas are important. These weren't in the previous batches, so I'm not sure. I don't have your transcription, so I really don't know. I'll just tell you the basic concept. What they can ask you about and what you should know is what GRAY stands for. You should know what sievert is. They can ask you about this. For us, in my exam yesterday, I got a question, absorption. What is the SI unit of radiation absorption in internal medicine? And I was just like, I have no clue. If I read this, I would have answered GRAY. I picked the wrong answer. The idea is they can ask you SI unit, it's fair game. Basically, what they're trying to tell you over here is when they're talking about energy absorbed by just one physical quantity, like just one element, let's say, they're going to use the term, they're going to use the unit of measurement as GRAY. Okay, it's the dose absorbed, just one object itself. Okay, but one, like wood, like plastic, whatever, when they're talking about a specific biological material, they're going to start using the term sievert. Okay, because the biological object, it depends on the radiation weighing factor as well. That's something. Okay, cool. And that also plays a role over here, so the unit is changed. Okay, now what's the difference between this and this? Both of these are human bodies. The only difference is this is probably a whole organ, and this is different tissues inside the organ. So let's say you have the heart, you have the endocardium, pericardium, myocardium, you have connective tissue, you have muscle tissue, all of this. So different types of tissues will have different effective dose. So absorbed dose is just like one non-biologic object. This is just biological object, and this is further dividing it into tissues. Okay, so they have like different doses that are allowed by different tissues, or this tissue can withstand this much dose. I don't know, but like that's the idea. Okay, no, it's a measurement of how much this thing was exposed to. Let's call it like this. Okay, they can bring this. I really don't know how they can bring this in any other way. This is for external radiological protection. No clue what this slide means. Apparently, from what I can read, they're telling you that there are sources of external radiation, there are physical quantities that this depends on. There's GRAY over here. Okay, cool. What they're trying to tell you, I think the most important thing is operational quantities versus protection quantities. So what they're trying to tell you, all of these units that you learned about earlier, they are in terms of protection, right? These quantities are not measurable. They are calculated quantities used to compare against observed health effects. Basically, they have this dummy, they have these synthetic particles or models, I should say, that resemble the structure of normal organs, something like this, and then they calculate the dose on that, and then they compare the dose with related to its adverse effect on the biological substance. I hope you understood something, because I have no other idea. And this is operational quantities. So apparently they use proper tools, they use proper instruments to measure this, and they use it for the operations. Like I think this one is most probably for the radiologist and practical application and all the guidance and stuff. I'm not sure, honestly, and I don't think it's that important. So we're done with this. Next, let's go on to our last. Okay. So this is by far the most memorization. I talked to you about contrast material, right? What is contrast material? It's basically something that is a lot more dense than the surrounding structure, and it helps you to be able to differentiate between the colors, right? Contrast, you're talking about the differences in colors, right? So over here, the only thing you're talking about, let's say there's a lizard, okay, you can't see clearly, but if you apply contrast, you can really, it really stands out. You know, it's just an example. Okay, pro tip, anything over here that is anything that is red is a possible MCQ question. The MCQ questions in this are crazy. They're going to give you 4 lines. And there's just going to be like 1 or 2 words that is misplaced between the lines, and you have to know which is the correct answer. This is why I'm telling you, this is pure, absolute memorization. Okay, so what they try to tell you is a chemical substance that is injected and enhances the contrast. It basically makes the image a specific body part more prominent. Usually it's an artery or a vein. Okay, you can also have oral contrast. I think they mentioned this. In oral contrast, what do? You drink, for example, if I want to image the bowels. What do? The bowels themselves are filled with air. That means they will appear to be very faint or dark or black or something. I can't really tell the differences between the wall parts. I drink contrast, it lights up the whole thing. I can see the wall very, very clearly. Okay, I think they'll show you an example. Dependence on mass density. So again, the more the atomic number, the more the mass density of an object. Bone has a higher mass density than soft tissue. Cool, we already talked about this. So mass density of bone is going to be more than the heart muscle. Cool. Okay, so there's different types of contrast media, and this is important. You need to memorize this. They may ask you about this, just memorize it, or just have a general idea. This is like 3 something, this is 4 something, this is 0.0 something. Barium and iodine are 2 different contrasts that we routinely use. You should know them. What? Radiologic images are a result of difference between X-rays absorbed photoelectrically and those that are absorbed not observed at all. Okay, so this is basically saying the same thing. Anything that you detect means that there was photoelectric effects between the object and the X-ray. Cool. Characteristic X-ray is called differential absorption. So again, the more dense the object, the more it'll absorb. So if something is radiolucent, it appears to be darker. If something is radio opaque, it appears to be brighter. Cool. Okay, this is important. So these are basically what the precautions or the procedures that we do when we give a contrast. Okay, so the first thing is NPO status. NPO basically means non-parole or something like that. Basically, it means that you will ask the patient not to eat or drink anything for a set amount of time. What is that set amount of time? For GA patients, GA stands for general anesthesia, the patients who are completely knocked out, not the people who are awake and they can just not feel stuff. So these people are completely knocked out. They will need fasting for 6 hours prior to this procedure. Whereas people who do not get general anesthesia follow the scheduled protocol, which we will talk about soon, or they won't talk about it. Okay, and patient weight also. We use the patient's weight to calculate the amount of contrast or the dose of contrast that we're going to administer. So contrast is basically like either it's an injectable fluid or it's like a drink, a milkshake or something that you either drink or they inject into your veins, and then after some time they will administer this. So the dose depends on the patient's weight. Higher weight is able to withstand more dose. Higher weight means more dose. Why does it need more dose? Because the patient is generally larger, fatter, so he's going to have more attenuation all around because he has more tissue, right? Okay, so special precaution in asthma. It does not require any measure prior to administration of non-ionic iodinated contrast media, okay? If someone has active symptoms, so this is controlled asthma. Controlled asthma basically means, I'll try to explain the medical terminology over here because I think that's more important for you guys. Controlled asthma means someone who is taking inhalers and stuff and it's controlled. He doesn't have asthma attacks on a regular basis, okay? Whereas someone who has active bronchospasm, it means that he's actively coughing, he's in active distress. You know, sometimes a patient comes to you and he is, for example, he had trauma to the lungs, you know, and now he can't really breathe. He has active bronchospasm. There's inflammation, something going on. He can't breathe at all. So you should refer back to the physician and ask him, do I give him contrast or do I not? Okay. Those who have recent exacerbation with last 48 hours. Okay, so recent exacerbation basically means, okay, he was well controlled in asthma, but for some reason he had a panic attack, he had an attack of acute sudden breathing, he can't breathe properly, shortness of breath, all of that, he should go to the radiologist, right? So the question is going to come to you, as a patient is this year-old, he has asthma and he has recent exacerbation 6 hours ago. Would you give iodine contrast anyway? B, refer back to the physician. C, depends on the radiologist's discretion. You know, it'll be something like this. So you need to know these. What will you do in which scenario? Allergy, again, you have to ask them always for allergies. Now the type of allergies, you can't really ask them, okay, sir, so are you allergic to iodine? Because like nobody drinks iodine in their daily life. Unless they're crazy. So you would ask about shellfish, or if they have had contrast media before. So shellfish has a lot of iodine in it. So some people who are allergic to it, they will most probably be also allergic to the contrast material, okay? No, you don't need to memorize the numbers of the different densities, just the contrast media. Maybe they make up. Okay, so diabetic patient again on this. Okay, diabetic patient on metformin. Metformin is also known as glucophage. It's the most common medication we give for diabetes. So the problem with diabetes is that, and especially metformin, is that it can damage the kidney. Now, what is the contrast? The contrast is basically something that they either inject into your blood or they inject, or you drink it, whatever. Either way, no, when they inject it into your blood, we're talking about intravenous here. We're talking about intravenous here, okay? Basically, if you inject it into the blood, how does it get out of the body? How do all toxins leave the body? Either through the liver or through the kidney. Now, the problem is iodine contrast leaves through the kidney. So if there is acute kidney injury, that means the iodine will not be able to leave it. Iodine, if given in a short amount of time as a contrast, is not dangerous. But if it cannot leave the body, it's definitely going to cause a lot of harm. So if a patient has acute kidney injury, we're going to do something. We're going to measure its kidney function using the GFR. And this basically gives us an idea of the GFR. And if it's greater than 30, then we don't need to stop metformin. Okay, but if it's less than 30, which basically means that he is in chronic kidney failure, then we will administer this, I guess, or undergoing arterial catheter studies that measures an emboli to the renal artery. Okay, sure. So if there is going under any other procedure involving a catheter, metformin should be discontinued 48 hours to the procedure, and then restarted once the renal function has been checked again. Okay, so renal function assessment, you do a creatine and an EGFR within 3 days of inpatient or 3 months of outpatient. Cool, just memorize EGFR, just memorize 3 days inpatient, 3 days outpatient. Okay, now the exception is a person on dialysis. What is dialysis? Basically, a person with end-stage renal disease, his kidneys stopped functioning altogether, and now he comes to the hospital every 3-4 days. He gets connected to a machine which cleans his blood, right? So when a patient is in dialysis, that means either way his blood is going to be clean, so you can give contrast. You don't need to stop giving it. In emergency situation, because the patient's life is on the line, it's immediate. You don't know if the patient has chronic kidney disease. You don't know what's going on with it, but his life is at stake, and you need to give contrast. You'll give contrast by the permission of the radiologist. Okay, so it's on the responsibility is that of the radiologist. He will evaluate the patient and give the decision instantaneously. The result of renal function assessment. Oh my God, I can't read this. Assessment shall be dealt with as follows. Okay, so they tell you the guidelines, just on the guidelines. Is there any important word that should be known to you? Okay, so what they're telling you is, sometimes if the eAGFR is certain level, it's normal is 90, okay? So 60, 45, 50, and all of these are lower, and as they go lower, they get worse, right? So what they're trying to tell you is that it depends on the eGFR. We measure the eGFR if we know that patient has a problem with his kidneys. And if the eGFR is only somewhat decreased, it's 60, normally it's 90, so it's a bit decreased. We can give him IV contrast, but they won't be iodine. They will be low osmolar, okay? Which basically means it's a bit less osmotic than normal IV contrast or something. And if it is 49 to 40 to 59, you'll get isoosmolar. Okay, cool. And if it's less than 40, then you do not, unless there is specifically communicated to or provided by the radiologist. You just have to memorize these. If really needed, then only isoosmolar. Why? Because the idea is the more the osmolarity, the less difficult it is for the body to eliminate it, because it's going to be heavier, right? The more heavier something is, and the more water that it draws to itself, which is basically the definition of osmolar, the more difficult it is for the kidney to get rid of it, especially if it's not working properly. So, and they may give you a question about the different types of contrast, and there is VisiPig over there. Now, you should keep in mind that VisiPig is an isoosmolar IV agent. You know, they may bring a question like this. Again, same thing. Yeah, prophylactic measures. Basically, prophylactic means that you're doing something preemptively. That's it. Pre-medications for allergic reactions are recommended in certain situations. Okay, so it's RAD, definitely memorize this. It's the same thing. Okay, again, he also asked about peanuts, because usually people who have peanut allergies may have allergies to contrast. You also have to ask about medications in general, not just about contrast, about any medication every time you ask a patient, because you know, it may be used some other time in the hospital, and it's really important to document this. Okay, so over here, what they mean by pre-medication is sometimes if the patient is generally allergic to something, but we think that no, this is serious enough that we need contrast, but it's not so serious that we don't give contrast at all. No, the opposite. So it's not as serious that we need to withhold contrast, but he does have some sort of allergy. If that's the case, then we may pre-medicate the patient. This pre-medication basically reduces the allergic response that he may develop if he was not pre-treated, okay? So what they're saying is that it's not really effective for severe contrast reactions, but rather in only minor reactions. And we'll get to the different types of reactions ahead, I'm hoping. But there's a spectrum, right? It may be a mild reaction, it may be really quite certain, it could be an anaphylactic shock and stuff. In association with administration of ionic rather than non-ionic agents. Okay, so basically just remember it's more effective for ionic contrast agents, and these conditions do not need this, and ionic contrast agents and minor reactions is more helpful for. And then they are telling you that if a patient is high risk, then you need to have immediate availability of resuscitation. Basically, a CPR team should be available. Crash cart has all the defibrillator, IV, epinephrine, everything that may be needed to manage the patient in an acute setting. Recommended pre-medication for adults is as follows. So you need to memorize these. You need to memorize these. I saw a question in which it was something like methylprednisone, and they gave different values. They gave instead of PO. PO basically means from the mouth. They gave IV instead. They changed 12 hours. So you really need to memorize each and every statement of this, because the MCQs themselves are really confusing. The other options, I mean. And you always tell the patient, in case he needs pre-medication, you always tell the patient not to drive back home. You ask him to have someone nearby to help him drive him back home. And if in case he does not have a drive back home, you will reschedule. You're like, no, I won't help you out unless you have a driver, because he could faint during his way back, and that could impose a danger not only to himself but to others as well. In an emergency setting, now this is different. This is emergency scenario, life or death. You give this pre-medication. If you're not sure and you have a high suspicion that he may need pre-medication, you're not sure, whatever, you give this stuff. Otherwise, you give this stuff. Administration of IV contrast media. Okay, so these are just the rules. So radiologist must be present physically over there. He can't go over Zoom and tell them stuff. He needs to make sure emergency equipment is there. IV contrast is high alert medication and should be administered at the policy. So different hospitals always have different policies for high alert medications, and IV contrast is one of them. Avoid multi-punctures of the vein during IV insertion. Okay, so why is this important? If I puncture a vein while I'm trying to insert IV contrast multiple times, the contrast itself may start leaking out from the multiple holes as soon as I inject it, right? So this is really important that if one site, I couldn't get it through one site, I don't go through the site at the same location. I would go to either the other hand, preferably, or I would either switch from like the radius to the brachia and stuff like this, okay? And you must, before you start the contrast is really heavy, okay? So it's like viscous, heavy stuff. So before you can actually start administering it, you need to make sure that the IV cannula, the hole that you placed, is working, because otherwise it can just block the hole and lead to a lot of other problems. So again, we said that there's different types of reactions. So this is major reaction, signs of major reaction. So if they bring these signs in a clinical vignette, you need to know this is a major reaction. And you have, what do you do in this? You will go for the ABCs. This is emergency, so you will check for the airways. You will first of all notify the residents and nursing. That's the first step. Then you will assess the airways and ABCs, so airway and breathing and vital signs, C's for circulation. And you will, if there is a problem, if the patient is unstable, which means basically any of these three vital signs are drastically different, you will activate the code. The code basically means it's basically like an alarm bell. It starts off like, in the hospital, it starts saying code blue, code blue, code blue, or something like that, a code. And that will alert everybody on the floor that there's an emergency going on. We need to go help out this patient, okay? Now, minor reactions are this. Just memorize the major ones, and you'll be able to tell what the minor ones are, because they're obviously not this. If asymptomatic, so if you thought that there was a reaction and the patient, he did not have a major reaction, or if it's a minor reaction, obviously it's not really that much. But if there's no symptoms at all, you just convert him and reassure him that, okay, the procedure went well. You can continue observing him until you are satisfied, and then you can discharge him and ask him to go home with a driver if he needs pre-medication. If the symptoms persist, now again, we're talking about minor reaction now. If they persist, because if it was major, khalas, you're doing the whole activation code, ABCs, calling the residents, okay? But over here, if he still has these symptoms, these minor symptoms, which are altered taste, blah, 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 and they're persisting or it's not relieving, then you may again notify the radiologist and secure an IV access. Why is securing IV access so important? Because you may need to give multiple medications one after the other. So you can't keep on injecting the patient because it takes a really long time. So you just maintain one IV access, and every time you just attach the thing to the IV drip. Okay, the medication to the IV drip. And that's about it. the joke, it gives you a definite edge. Cool, because you can't see it here, and then the contrast is here, and then everything else is clarified. Good. That's about it. Now, do you have any questions regarding anything so far? Okay, someone asked, but stochastic becomes bad with time as well too. Yes, both of them decrease with time. The difference is one increases very rapidly once it starts. It takes time to start. Once the deterministic starts, it shoots up very rapidly. Whereas stochastic, think of it as like overall accumulation of those causes more DNA damage. Every time he's exposed, he has some more damage. But it's the same proportion every time. The other one, the more he's accumulating, he's having a lot more DNA breakage. Okay, we should memorize. Yeah, okay, I told this, just the IV axis. Yeah, just the ones I mentioned in the lectures. Again, the most important things is the red stuff. The other stuff, just read it once, twice, do the practice questions that you have, and you'll be good. Do you have any questions regarding anything that I explained so far? That's it, we're done basically. But a couple of things I want to tell you. Could you please stop recording me firstly? MSA development. Who's there? Is Sarah still there? Oh my God, if she's still there, that's bad.